In the shifting sands of Egypt, beneath the silence of collapsed temples and forgotten corridors of stone, lies a mystery that continues to challenge both archaeology and imagination. Among the bodies embalmed and preserved by the rituals of the ancients, there are skulls that do not fit the frame of human normality. They are elongated, stretched backward into strange alien proportions, as if nature itself bent differently for those who once carried them. When these skulls are lifted from the dust, it is as if history is whispering in a language we do not understand, a language older than dynasties, older than empires, perhaps older than humankind itself. The first reaction of scholars when encountering elongated skulls is to reference head binding, an ancient and documented practice where infant skulls were wrapped tightly with cloth or boards, slowly deforming their growth. Indeed, cultures across the world have done this. The Mayans, the pharaohs of Peru, even some tribes in Africa and Asia. But when the practice is recorded, it is usually explained as a mark of beauty, of nobility, or of belonging to an elite class. The head is reshaped deliberately to look like someone or something that already existed. It is not born of imagination, but imitation, which raises the unsettling question: what were they imitating? Imagine walking into a tomb deep within the Valley of the Kings, the air stale with centuries of dust. The sarcophagus opens, not to reveal the familiar geometry of a human skull, but something that seems more at home in a work of science fiction. The forehead towers like a wall, the back of the head curves into a long slope, and the eye sockets appear larger than they should be, like dark wells carved for sight beyond human scale. To an ancient embalmer, such a head would have demanded reverence. And so, it was wrapped, ornamented, and sealed with the same rituals as a pharaoh. To us, it is evidence that defies the comfort of normality. Some argue that these skulls were never biological anomalies at all, but ceremonial constructs, misinterpreted by modern eyes. Perhaps bones were damaged, warped through centuries of pressure and erosion, creating illusions of elongation. Yet others point out that several of these skulls are found in locations associated with figures of high status. If elongation was merely an accident, why do they appear in tombs prepared with wealth and care, reserved for those with power? Could it be that elongated skulls were not flaws, but signs of a lineage set apart? The debate deepens when we look beyond Egypt. In Peru, the pharaohs' skulls stand as some of the most famous elongated remains in the world. DNA studies on these skulls have produced controversial results. Claims of non-human markers, though dismissed by mainstream science as errors or contamination. In Malta, elongated skulls are displayed in the hypogeum, associated with subterranean temples and rituals. In Africa, tribes once bound the heads of children to emulate ancestors believed to descend from the stars. The echo is global. The shape of the skull seems to have been more than a fashion. It was a symbol, and symbols are born from memory. In Egypt, the Amarna period offers haunting imagery. Statues of Pharaoh Akhenaten, his wife Nefertiti, and their daughters show skulls that are elongated, with sloping foreheads and exaggerated features. Historians have long debated whether this was an artistic style, a symbol of the pharaoh's break from tradition, or an accurate reflection of physical reality. Akhenaten's reign was unique. He abandoned the old gods, worshipped the sun disk Aten, and presented himself as something beyond mortal. Could it be that his family's strange appearance was not merely symbolic, but biological? If so, then Egyptian art may have been less a matter of style and more a record of something our history has tried to forget. Now, imagine this scenario with intensity. Deep in an unopened chamber, archaeologists stumble upon a sarcophagus unlike any other. Inside, the body is preserved immaculately, but the head is grotesquely stretched, almost double the length of an ordinary human skull. Medical scans reveal a cranial capacity significantly larger than ours, suggesting a brain that could process thought differently, perhaps faster, perhaps in ways alien to human cognition. If such a discovery were made public, what would it mean? Entire textbooks would collapse in a single instant. Human evolution, the narrative of our species, would have to be rewritten. The line between myth and history would dissolve. Skeptics warn against exaggeration. They argue that the skulls are simply anomalies, genetic mutations, or results of cranial binding misunderstood. They point to the lack of clear DNA evidence, the contamination of samples, the absence of reliable carbon dating in some cases, and yet, the mystery refuses to die. For every rational explanation, there is an unanswered question. Why do so many depictions of gods, pharaohs, and rulers show elongated heads? Why do myths across the world speak of star beings, sky teachers, or gods who descend to earth with knowledge beyond measure? Let us take an example. The Dogon tribe of Mali has myths of the Nomo, beings from the star Sirius who came to earth to teach humanity. The tribe's artwork often depicts figures with long heads, large eyes, and slender forms. In Egypt, Sirius was central to calendars, rituals, and myths. If such beings visited, could the elongated skulls be the preserved remains of these teachers? Or perhaps, if not visitors from the stars, then hybrids, offspring of human and non-human unions, preserved as rulers because they were seen as mediators between the two worlds. The psychological impact of such a possibility cannot be overstated. To believe that elongated skulls in Egyptian tombs belong to non-humans is to suggest that humanity's greatest civilization was not built by humans alone. It challenges the foundations of human pride. We like to think the pyramids, the temples, the hieroglyphs were all our own. But if elongated skulls belong to a race with greater intellect, then perhaps Egypt's golden age was a collaboration between species. That collaboration, if true, means the legacy of the pharaohs is not entirely ours. Consider how modern audiences react to depictions of aliens in films. Beings with long heads, enlarged eyes, advanced wisdom. From the xenomorph of science fiction horror to the graceful depictions of star beings in spiritual accounts, the archetype of the elongated skull recurs. Is this archetype modern invention or subconscious inheritance? Did our ancestors see such beings and preserve their memory in stories, art, and even the practice of reshaping their own children's skulls to mimic them? If so, then every elongated skull in an Egyptian tomb is not an anomaly, but a clue, a fragment of a forgotten history buried under the sand. Imagine the silence of an ancient embalmer, standing over a body with a skull so unlike his own. He wraps it carefully, layer after layer, whispering prayers to guide a spirit that may not be human at all. The amulets he places on the chest are chosen not for ordinary men, but for gods. The tomb is sealed not as a burial, but as containment, reverence, and fear all at once. Thousands of years later, when the seal is broken, we see only the skull, but we cannot hear the prayers. We cannot feel the trembling hands that embalmed it. We cannot grasp the awe of standing in the presence of something not human. What makes the elongated skulls even more unsettling is the cultural echo they left behind. Across countless regions, we find head binding not as an isolated phenomenon, but as a persistent and symbolic act. Why would so many civilizations, separated by oceans and time, seek to mimic a shape so unnatural unless they were imitating something they once saw? In Peru, whole dynasties were distinguished by elongated skulls, suggesting that the shape itself was seen as divine. In Egypt, if the royals truly bore elongated skulls, then the practice of artificial cranial deformation elsewhere may have been a desperate attempt to emulate their godlike presence. One must ask, what did ordinary Egyptians think when they saw depictions of rulers with elongated heads? Did they believe their kings were closer to the gods, not merely by bloodline, but by biology? Could this have deepened the sense of distance between the divine elite and the laboring masses, making obedience not just political but existential? If your ruler's very body carried evidence of difference, how could you not believe he was destined to command you? The elongated skulls may also shed light on myths of hidden knowledge. The priests of ancient Egypt were said to carry wisdom beyond comprehension: mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering. Some temples depict gods handing over tools of knowledge to humans. Were these skulls, with their larger cranial volumes, the physical vessels of that extraordinary knowledge? Imagine if their thought processes were simply beyond ours. Their perception of time, energy, and space expanded in ways we can barely conceive. Could their skulls have housed minds wired for otherworldly logic? Now picture this. A young archaeologist holding in her gloved hands the skull of someone buried 3,000 years ago. The skull is long, the eye sockets cavernous, the jaw thin and delicate. In that moment, she feels not only the weight of the bone, but the gravity of a question. What if this was never human? What if she is looking into the hollow eyes of another species, a being who once walked these deserts, prayed in these temples, and ruled among these people? The tremor in her hands is not fear of death, but fear of history itself unraveling. There is also the possibility of interbreeding, a theory many reject but cannot fully dismiss. If elongated skulls belong to another species, hybrids might have existed, blending human and non-human traits. Legends of demigods, of children born of gods and mortals, could be echoes of this. The skulls, preserved in tombs, may have been honored not simply as rulers, but as bridges between worlds. Their bloodline, diluted over centuries, might still flow in modern veins, unnoticed, unmeasured. And yet, mystery thrives on silence. Many of these elongated skulls are locked away in restricted archives, inaccessible to the public. Museums downplay them, explaining them quickly as cultural practices, avoiding deeper speculation. Is this caution born of scientific rigor or fear of rewriting history itself? For if one elongated skull were conclusively proven to be non-human, the timeline of our species, the pride of our civilizations, would unravel. It would mean that humanity's story is not singular, but shared. Perhaps this is why the elongated skulls haunt us. They are not just bones, they are symbols, fractures in the narrative we have built about ourselves. When you look at one, stretched and foreign, you feel the unsettling pull of a parallel truth. They whisper that we were not alone in the deserts of Egypt, that we shared our golden age with others who left behind only fragments of their presence. Fragments heavy enough to challenge the arrogance of calling ourselves the only architects of civilization. They remind us that history is not closed, that the sand still hides secrets too vast for comfort. So the question remains, and it will not be silenced. Were the elongated skulls found in some tombs merely human anomalies? Or are they fragments of a history that includes others among us? Until the day comes when science pierces through contamination, until genetic sequences are read without doubt, the skulls remain a riddle. They sit in museums, in vaults, in private collections, staring through hollow sockets at a species unwilling to face the possibility that it may not be alone in its own history. And perhaps that is their true power, not answers, but questions. Questions that pull at the boundaries of what we dare to believe. In the long and silent chambers of Egypt's ancient tombs, the dead do not sleep easily. For centuries, they have been objects of awe, reverence, fear, and endless scientific curiosity. When modern technology finally advanced enough to reach beneath the linen wrappings and into the molecular code of the pharaohs themselves, the world stood on the edge of revelation. DNA, the sacred script of life, was now open to inspection. Yet, just as the first fragments of genetic truth began to emerge, the tests were halted. No official explanation, no detailed statement, just silence. Silence thick enough to feel like a wall. Silence heavy enough to hint at something no one dares to say aloud. The story begins in the late 20th century, when teams of researchers secured permission to conduct genetic analysis on royal mummies. It was a bold project, to read the bloodlines of the ancient rulers, to confirm genealogies long suspected but never proven, and perhaps to answer questions about the origins of Egyptian civilization itself. The tools were ready: PCR amplification, sequencing technologies, and later next-generation analysis. For the first time, the dust of ages could be translated into data, and the kings of Egypt could reveal their deepest secret, their very lineage. The world leaned closer, eager for the results. In 2010, the world was electrified when the DNA of Tutankhamun was announced. He was revealed to be the son of Akhenaten, the heretic king who worshipped the Aten. The tests also showed evidence of familial inbreeding. Tutankhamun's mother was Akhenaten's sister, or possibly a close relative. The boy king's frail health, his clubfoot, his genetic disorders, all were explained by this practice. And then, as suddenly as the project had begun, silence. The work stopped. Teams disbanded. Samples disappeared into vaults. Announcements faded. The promise of further revelations was extinguished like a flame snuffed in the wind. Why? Why would a field of study so promising, so capable of rewriting the history of the pharaohs, be halted with no public explanation? This is where mystery begins to thicken into something heavier. Some scientists whispered of contamination, that the fragile ancient DNA was too degraded, too easily compromised by modern handlers. Others suggested bureaucratic struggles, funding collapses, or political interference from Egyptian authorities. But the absence of official answers, the abruptness of the stop, the refusal to release raw data, these fuel suspicion. Silence in science is rarely accidental. It is deliberate. Imagine this scene. In a sterile lab under fluorescent light, a geneticist peers into a sequencing readout. On the screen, strands of code unravel, familiar, and yet not. At first, the anomalies seem like errors. The base pairs don't align as expected. Reruns confirm the same result. It is human, but something extra lingers, as if the sequence is written with letters outside the alphabet of Earth. The scientist pauses, feeling the cold wash of realization. The code does not fully match humanity. And then, before the discovery can be spoken, the project is shut down. Skeptics dismiss this vision as a fantasy. They argue the tests were stopped for practical reasons: lack of funding, contamination risk, or simple exhaustion of material. But the silence of explanation fuels suspicion. If it were so simple, why not release a statement, an article, a paper acknowledging the limits? Instead, the projects ended in shadows, the data sealed, the raw results hidden from the public eye. To believers in hidden truths, this silence is the loudest proof of all. There are whispers in academic circles that the DNA of certain mummies did not match modern humans exactly. That sequences carried mutations too vast, too unusual, to be explained by inbreeding alone. Rumors suggest that mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, revealed lineages foreign to known populations. Others claim nuclear DNA markers align strangely with none of the surrounding regions, neither Nubian, nor Levantine, nor Mesopotamian. If true, such anomalies would demand answers impossible to contain. Consider the stakes. If royal mummies carried genetic markers unlike any other population on Earth, what would that imply? That Egypt's ruling class was descended from outsiders? That they were hybrids, blending human and non-human bloodlines? Or that they came from a lost civilization whose genome has vanished? Any one of these answers would destabilize not only Egyptology, but the story of human history itself. The pyramids, temples, and hieroglyphs would no longer be the work of humanity alone, but the evidence of collaboration or interference. We must not forget that Akhenaten's family was depicted with strangely elongated heads and features beyond human norm. DNA could have confirmed whether these depictions were artistic exaggerations or biological realities. If results showed non-human anomalies, it would explain why those depictions were so persistent, and why his cult was suppressed after his death. The sudden halting of tests, then, begins to look less like coincidence and more like deliberate silence. Picture this. A press conference planned, journalists gathered, cameras ready. The results are to be unveiled. But hours before the event, officials intervene. Papers are withdrawn, researchers go quiet. Years later, some of them refuse to speak, citing confidentiality agreements. What discovery could trigger such coordinated silence? Bureaucratic inconvenience cannot explain that level of secrecy, but the revelation of genetic material outside the human norm could. There is another layer to this mystery: politics. Egypt guards its heritage fiercely, and rightly so. The mummies are national treasures, embodiments of cultural pride. If DNA results suggested that Egypt's kings were not entirely Egyptian, or not entirely human, what would that mean for national identity? It would shift ownership of legacy from the people of the Nile to something other, something unclaimable. It could destabilize not only heritage, but tourism, religion, and global narratives of origin. The world has seen similar silences before. In Peru, DNA testing of elongated skulls was announced with fanfare, only for the results to vanish into obscurity. In Siberia, strange remains linked to Denisovans were partially published, while much of the data remains sealed. Patterns repeat. Where anomalies emerge, silence follows. In this sense, Egypt's halted DNA studies fit a global design, a quiet suppression of discoveries that challenge the story of humanity as a closed system. Now, let us look at this possibility with imagination. Suppose the DNA of certain mummies revealed sequences closer to something extraterrestrial than terrestrial. Imagine markers that linked not to Africa, not to Asia, but to nothing on Earth. how would governments react? They would bury it, not in sand, but in secrecy. To reveal it would unleash chaos, religion shaken, science split, public panic ignited. Better to keep silence than to risk unraveling civilization's fragile narrative. Of course, it may also be simpler. Perhaps results truly were inconclusive, the material too degraded, the contamination too pervasive. But why then the lack of transparency? Science thrives on publishing even failures. The fact that failures were not published suggests something beyond failure. It suggests results existed, results too explosive to be released. Imagine the loneliness of the scientist who first saw such results, alone in a lab, staring at data that suggests humanity's kings were not fully human. Do they feel exhilaration or dread? Do they want to shout it to the world, or do they fear what it would mean for their career, their family, their society? In the end, silence prevails, not because truth is absent, but because truth is unbearable. To grasp the weight of what abruptly halted DNA testing implies, we must remember how rare such opportunities are. Mummies are not infinite resources. Each sample risks damage, each test consumes material that cannot be replaced. Researchers begged for decades to be allowed to test them. Permissions were granted reluctantly, after immense bureaucratic struggle, under promises of responsible transparency. For the work to then stop halfway is not simply inconvenient, it is catastrophic to the pursuit of knowledge. Let us not underestimate how deeply such knowledge would cut. If the mummy's DNA carried signatures alien to humanity, every narrative we tell in classrooms collapses. Imagine history textbooks rewritten. The cradle of civilization was not solely human, but hybrid. The story of Egypt's rise was not just the ingenuity of Nile farmers and architects, but the legacy of beings with otherworldly genes. Imagine the pyramids no longer as monuments to human will, but as markers of a collaboration between species. Imagine the temples not as symbols of faith, but as echoes of a pact. The silence also aligns with ancient traditions of secrecy. Egyptian priests guarded their knowledge fiercely. Temples were libraries of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Yet, commoners were never permitted access. What if the silence around modern DNA results is simply a continuation of this old law, that what was once hidden behind stone walls is now hidden behind academic embargoes, still forbidden to the uninitiated? Knowledge is power, and power is never shared easily. Let us draw a parallel to Roswell or other incidents where governments locked away truths they feared the public could not handle. If elongated skulls and genetic anomalies suggested alien heritage, would it not make sense that modern institutions would mirror ancient secrecy? The pharaohs ruled by divine right. Their legitimacy depended on being different from ordinary men. If science proved that difference real, genetically real, it would not diminish their power, but resurrect it. Perhaps that is the greatest fear of all. Think of the symbolism. Mummies wrapped to preserve, tombs sealed to protect, DNA hidden to silence. At every level, the story of Egypt is a story of concealment. The gods are depicted with animal heads, but perhaps these were symbolic masks hiding other truths. What if the greatest mask of all is the one we placed on the data itself? What if the tests told us what the ancients always hinted, that their rulers were of a bloodline not of this earth? There are persistent rumors of unpublished papers, of drafts that never saw light. Scientists who whisper of anomalies that did not match known human haplogroups. There are rumors that some sequences bore resemblance not to Africans, not to Europeans, not to Asians, but to nothing cataloged in the global genetic databases. For geneticists, such results are career-ending unless framed carefully. The risk of ridicule, the label of pseudoscience, is enough to bury truth under silence. Yet, whispers persist. Consider the emotional toll. Imagine devoting years to decoding a king's DNA, only to discover it does not belong to the human tree. Imagine the weight of deciding whether to tell the world or to stay silent. Silence becomes an act of survival, not just personal survival, but societal survival. To preserve the fragile fabric of consensus, truth is hidden. It is a sacrifice to stability, not to knowledge. Yet the skulls, the art, the myths remain. They stare back at us with quiet accusation, as if to say, "You know the answer already." You see it in our faces, in our statues, in the proportions carved in stone. You see it in the sudden halting of science when it drew too close. The evidence is everywhere but unspoken, like a riddle etched in shadow. One day, perhaps, a whistleblower will release the raw data. Perhaps a forgotten archive will surface. Perhaps technology will advance to recover what was once unreadable. And when that day comes, the halted silence of today will be remembered not as failure, but as delay. For truth cannot be buried forever, not even in sand, not even in secrecy. Bones whisper, DNA remembers, and one day, so will we. Beneath the sands of Egypt, where corridors of stone stretch into silence, archaeologists have uncovered coffins that defy the proportions of the human body. These sarcophagi, massive and oversized, loom like monuments in themselves, too large for ordinary men or women, too vast even for kings seated upon thrones. When opened, some contain remains. Others lie empty, as if waiting for occupants that never arrived. Their sheer scale unsettles the imagination. Were they truly built for humans or for something else? The ancient Egyptians mastered the art of building, to scale, to proportion. Their pyramids aligned to celestial stars. Their statues balanced grandeur with detail. These were people who measured everything with precision, who believed harmony itself was divine. So, when coffins appear far larger than the bodies they contain, the discrepancy demands attention. It is not an accident, it is intention. But whose intention, and why? Some argue that oversized sarcophagi were meant for symbolic purposes, representing the cosmic stature of the deceased. To be laid in a coffin beyond human scale was to transcend mortality, to be marked as a being greater than flesh. But others whisper of something stranger, that perhaps these coffins were not symbolic at all. Perhaps they were functional, built to house beings whose frames dwarfed our own, beings whose bones might not have survived the millennia, but whose containers remain. Imagine descending into the darkness of the Serapeum of Saqqara, a labyrinth of tunnels lined with granite sarcophagi weighing up to 70 tons each. These massive boxes are so large they make men look like insects beside them. Egyptologists say they housed sacred bulls of Apis, revered in cult ritual. Yet questions linger. Why such extraordinary precision? Why such Herculean labor for animals? Could the bulls be a cover story, a misinterpretation of something too alien to admit? Could these coffins have been built for beings of impossible size? Consider also the Valley of the Kings. Some coffins are elongated not just in width, but in length, stretching far beyond the proportions of the human skeletons inside. The bodies appear almost dwarfed by the sarcophagus, as though the coffin was not built for them, but repurposed. Were these rulers laid to rest in coffins that once belonged to another race? Or were the coffins built according to a template of beings taller, broader, stranger than us? Skeptics explain the scale as grandeur. Pharaohs demanded extravagance, and coffins were made large to symbolize power. Yet even in extravagance, design follows function. Why build containers so exact in proportion, so geometrically perfect, if they were never meant to fit? Why waste resources on stone that would remain empty? Unless, of course, the coffins were not empty at all when they were first built. Unless their original occupants were not human kings, but something else entirely. Legends across cultures speak of giants, the Nephilim in the Hebrew texts, the Titans of Greek lore, the star-born gods of Sumeria, all described as towering, larger than mortals, beings who walked among men. If such beings existed in Egypt, their remains may not have survived the ravages of time, but their coffins, carved from stone, endure. Oversized sarcophagi could be the silent witnesses of their existence, empty shells that once held bodies whose dimensions we dare not imagine. Picture the scene. A torch flickers in an underground chamber. Archaeologists gather around a lid that takes dozens of men to move. With a thunderous crack, the stone shifts. Inside lies a coffin vast enough to hold a giant. The expectation is human remains. But what if, long ago, the original contents were removed, hidden, destroyed? What if all that remains is the empty monument to a truth carefully buried? The size of the coffin testifies louder than any body. Whoever it was built for was not one of us. There are also anomalies and inscriptions. Some oversized coffins bear no names, no hieroglyphic prayers. In a culture obsessed with documenting the passage to the afterlife, This silence is deafening. Who were these coffins for, if not for humans whose souls required guiding texts? Perhaps they were for beings who had no need of human rituals. Perhaps they belonged to entities whose afterlife was not the one Egyptians knew. And if so, then these coffins are the strongest evidence of all, that Egypt's tombs were not reserved for humans alone. Now, imagine the practical implications. To carve a coffin of such size required technology and manpower beyond ordinary funerary work. Stone had to be quarried, transported, shaped with impossible precision. For what? For an empty box? Or for a secret so extraordinary it had to be concealed under the guise of ritual? If we accept the latter, then oversized coffins are not puzzles, but confessions. Silent admissions that Egypt housed not just humans, but something other. Some researchers connect these anomalies to depictions of gods in Egyptian art. Consider Osiris, often shown towering, his frame massive, his crown stretching skyward. Or Ptah, wrapped in sarcophagus like himself, suggesting an intimate connection between coffin and god. Could oversized coffins be linked to the literal size of such beings? Were the gods not metaphors, but memories? Memories carved in stone that we mistake for symbolism. The scale of these coffins also challenges our sense of scale and time. If they were built for giants, then those giants lived in the same Nile valleys, walked the same sands, looked at the same stars. The distance between myth and history collapses. The beings we relegate to legend may have stood in the temples of Luxor, may have been embalmed by the priests, may have been feared or worshipped as rulers, and in death, they required coffins far larger than any human body. Skeptics, of course, resist. They argue that without bones, the coffins prove nothing. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We know looters stripped tombs for gold, for jewels, for valuables. What if they also removed what was too shocking? What if priests themselves, fearful of later generations, destroyed the bodies, but preserved the coffins, unable to erase entirely what once existed? In this light, the coffins are not empty. They are witnesses, stripped of their testimony, but still speaking. To explore this further, let us turn to the Serapeum once more. Deep beneath Saqqara, in pitch-black tunnels, stand sarcophagi so massive that modern cranes strain to imagine moving them. Their lids alone weigh dozens of tons. Their interiors are polished with impossible precision, smoother than the inside of modern machine-carved stone. Egyptologists say these were made for bulls, but when one stands before them, the explanation feels thin. Could an animal, however sacred, require such divine precision? Or were these boxes originally built for something far larger? There are tales from early explorers who claim that when some of these lids were lifted, the chambers inside were scorched, as if something of immense energy had once occupied them. Some described a lingering smell of resin and burned stone. If true, these details hint at a function beyond funerary use. Could the oversized coffins have been containment vessels? Not just to house bodies, but to imprison forces too dangerous for release. The silence of inscriptions is perhaps the loudest voice in this mystery. Egyptian culture thrived on names. To erase a name was to erase a soul, yet many oversized sarcophagi are blank, their surfaces devoid of hieroglyphs. It is as if the builders did not want to reveal, or could not reveal, the identity of the occupant. Such silence suggests secrecy, perhaps even fear. These were not meant to be remembered. They were meant to be hidden, preserved only as warnings to those who might stumble upon them. Let us also consider the possibility of repurposing. Some pharaohs may have been interred in coffins originally built for others. Imagine the disquiet of a priest lowering the frail body of a king into a coffin designed for a being twice his size. The rituals continue, the prayers are spoken, but the mismatch between body and coffin is undeniable. The coffin becomes a disguise, a relic reused, its true story concealed under the weight of ceremony. Legends of giants ripple across the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki descend from the heavens, their forms towering. In the Bible, the Nephilim are described as men of renown, mighty and vast. In Greek myth, titans stride across the earth, waging war on gods themselves. Egypt, so often connected to these neighboring cultures, may have had its own giants, its own colossal beings remembered in stone. If so, the oversized coffins are their shadows, the only traces of their presence left for us to puzzle over. Imagine the psychological impact on archaeologists discovering such coffins, standing in a chamber dwarfed by a sarcophagus that could hold not just a man, but 2 or 3 men stacked end to end. The rational mind scrambles for explanations, symbolism, extravagance, ritual. But deep inside, another thought claws forward. What if these coffins were built for giants? What if the myths were not myths at all, but censored history? Consider also the engineering required. Cutting, transporting, and sealing these massive coffins demanded knowledge of leverage, friction, and balance far beyond ordinary needs. Why would a culture pour such effort into something unnecessary? Unless necessity demanded it. Unless there truly was something, someone, so large that only such coffins could contain them. Technology and effort follow purpose, and the purpose here seems far larger than human. Modern theorists suggest another angle. Perhaps the coffins were not for physical giants, but for beings of energy, entities whose presence required containment. The size, the sealed lids, the blank inscriptions, all could point to prisons rather than graves. Ancient priests may have locked away what they could not destroy, entombing it beneath layers of stone. If so, then these coffins are not memorials, but warning signs. Do not open. If we have opened them, then perhaps we have already broken that ancient law. The oversized coffins also force us to rethink the scale of Egyptian architecture itself. The pyramids, the temples, the obelisks, all immense, all dwarfing human proportions. Perhaps this was not mere grandeur, but necessity. Perhaps Egypt's world was once shared with beings of a size that demanded colossal monuments. If so, then the architecture is not symbolic of divinity, but practical accommodation for bodies, rituals, and burials too vast for men. And yet, the coffins remain largely unexplained. Scholars argue, tourists gaze, theorists speculate. But the stone itself remains indifferent. It waits in the silence of tombs, massive, immovable, daring us to explain why they exist. Until a definitive answer emerges, the coffins are more than objects. They are questions carved in granite, questions heavy enough to bend the spine of history itself. So we are left with possibilities. That they were made for bulls, though such effort strains belief. That they were symbols of divine grandeur, though the silence of inscriptions contradicts it. Or that they were made for beings larger than humans, beings whose presence is whispered in myth and suggested in art, beings whose graves remain hidden but whose coffins still loom in the dark. Whatever the truth, these oversized sarcophagi challenge the arrogance of certainty. They stand as monuments to a history we are not yet brave enough to admit. And perhaps that is the most haunting thought of all, that the coffins too large for human proportions are not mistakes, not symbols, not misinterpretations. They are evidence. Evidence that the dead of Egypt were not all human. Evidence that the sands conceal more than history. They conceal truth itself, truth too vast to fit in the proportions of man. Across the walls of Egypt's ancient temples, beneath the flickering light of torches carried by explorers and archaeologists, the gods stare back at us. They do not stare with human faces. They are not men and women as we know them. Instead, they appear as hybrids, falcon-headed Horus, with eyes like the sky, jackal-headed Anubis guarding the dead, crocodile-headed Sobek, glistening with power, lion-headed Sekhmet, radiating ferocity. These are not abstract patterns or decorative inventions. They are deliberate choices, repeated with precision across centuries. They are beings, painted in devotion, carved in stone, worshipped in ritual. And if the Egyptians painted their gods as hybrids, the question demands itself. What did they see? Egyptian art was not symbolic in the way modern eyes imagine. The ancients believed in Ma'at, in cosmic truth and balance, and their images were not casual representations, but invocations of reality itself. To paint a god was not to create art, but to channel a presence. And so, the question emerges, why did they channel hybrid beings, part human, part animal, part something else entirely? What memory were they preserving? What truth were they encoding in pigment and stone? Some scholars say these were metaphors. The falcon represented the sky, so Horus was depicted with a falcon's head. The jackal prowled graveyards, so Anubis bore its face. The crocodile ruled the Nile's waters, so Sobek embodied its strength. Yet, metaphors do not explain the consistency of these depictions. repeated with obsessive accuracy across dynasties? If purely symbolic, why did every temple, every tomb across centuries show the same beings in the same forms? Symbols evolve, but these images did not. They were protected, preserved, replicated without alteration. They were not metaphor, they were memory. Imagine standing in the Temple of Horus at Edfu. The walls rise around you, carved with hieroglyphs, painted with scenes of the falcon-headed god descending from the heavens, leading pharaohs, granting power. The detail is not casual. The eyes, sharp and predatory, stare down as if alive. The feathers are etched with precision, the beak curved and exact. This is not the work of fantasy. This is documentation. These were beings witnessed, remembered, and revered. And if remembered, then perhaps once real. The worship of hybrid gods was not fringe, but central. Entire cults rose around them. Priests served them, offerings were made daily, temples were erected in their honor. In the daily life of Egypt, the gods were not distant metaphors, but living presences, expected to intervene in floods, harvests, wars, and judgments of the soul. To suggest they were merely animals made into symbols diminishes the intensity of devotion. Why would a civilization build its entire spiritual and political system around symbols unless those symbols were rooted in something witnessed, something undeniable? Some researchers suggest the hybrid gods reflect encounters with beings who were neither fully human nor fully animal. Perhaps visitors, perhaps remnants of an earlier civilization, perhaps genetic hybrids created in ages when knowledge of manipulation was far beyond ours. Ancient texts speak of gods walking among men, ruling, teaching, and even interbreeding. Could the paintings of hybrid beings be literal portraits of those who once walked the Nile? Consider Sobek, the crocodile-headed god. Archaeological evidence shows that crocodiles were mummified and placed in temples as offerings. But why worship the crocodile so intensely? Was Sobek simply a projection of fear and respect? Or was he the memory of a being who appeared to humans with crocodilian features, inspiring terror and devotion so profound it lasted thousands of years? In this scenario, Sobek was not invented, but remembered. Think also of Thoth, often depicted with the head of an ibis, bearer of divine wisdom, inventor of writing. Why an ibis? Why a bird associated with balance, precision, and intellect? Did the Egyptians encounter a being with a face avian in nature, a creature that communicated knowledge and order? If so, the paintings of Thoth are not allegory, but portraiture. Imagine the psychological effect of such encounters. A farmer, kneeling in the fields, suddenly sees a figure approaching, a body tall and upright, but the head unmistakably that of a falcon, with eyes glinting against the sun. To the farmer, this is not myth. It is experience. It is memory. He returns to his village and tells of what he has seen. Over a time, these encounters solidify into religion. The gods are painted not because they are imagined, but because they are witnessed. The Book of the Dead is filled with images of hybrid judges weighing the soul of the deceased. Anubis, jackal-headed, presides over scales, watching with cold, predatory eyes as the heart is weighed against a feather. This scene is not symbolic theater. To the Egyptians, it was reality, a vision of what awaited beyond death. If the judges of the soul were hybrid beings, then death itself was governed not by human forms, but by others. Skeptics argue that animal-headed gods are merely the human attempt to embody qualities beyond words. Yet, human imagination is wildly diverse, and yet in Egypt, the forms of gods remained rigid, unchanging, almost dogmatic. If imagination ruled, variation would have flourished, but instead, consistency ruled. Horus was always falcon-headed, Anubis was always a jackal, Sobek always a crocodile. Such consistency suggests reference, not invention. Legends of hybrids are not unique to Egypt. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were described as half-man, half-fish beings who emerged from the sea to teach humanity. In India, Narasimha, the man-lion avatar, emerged to destroy evil. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was revered as a god of wisdom. Across the globe, cultures recorded encounters with beings that merged forms. Egypt was part of this larger chorus, its paintings one part of a universal memory. What if, then, the hybrid gods of Egypt were real beings, genetic hybrids, engineered by technologies we have forgotten? Modern science experiments with CRISPR, with the blending of DNA across species. What if this is not new knowledge, but rediscovered? What if the ancients witnessed beings who were the result of genetic mastery beyond our own and recorded them as gods? Imagine stepping into the Temple of Karnak at night, the moonlight casting shadows over columns carved with depictions of hybrid beings. Their forms loom in the darkness, wings, beaks, jaws, claws. They stare back at you as if alive. The atmosphere is not symbolic. It is unsettlingly literal. These are guardians, watchers, beings who claimed devotion and submission. And standing in their gaze, you realize, to the Egyptians, these were not pictures, they were presences. Now consider the mummification of animals themselves. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, bulls, all embalmed, preserved, and entombed by the millions. Was this mere symbolism, or was it an attempt to honor the creatures linked to the hybrid gods, a way of preserving their essence for the afterlife? If gods were hybrids, then their animal aspects were sacred, not metaphorical. The paintings, then, were documentation of hierarchy. Humans, animals, and hybrids intertwined in cosmic order. If paintings of hybrid gods are literal records, then Egypt's religion was not religion at all, but history. History painted on walls, encoded in ritual, preserved in myth. The gods were rulers, teachers, beings of immense power whose presence demanded obedience. Worship was less faith than politics, less imagination than survival. To follow the gods was to align with the real forces who held dominion. The implications are staggering. If Egypt's gods were hybrids, then the pharaohs, who claimed descent from gods, may have carried hybrid blood themselves. The divine right of kings was not metaphorical, but genetic. Paintings of gods with falcon heads or jackal faces were not artistic choices, but records of ancestry. To be pharaoh was to be hybrid, a being whose body linked human and other. To understand the gravity of these depictions, we must step into the Egyptian worldview. For the ancients, to write or paint was to invoke reality. Hieroglyphs were not letters, but living symbols. To inscribe them was to give them life. Thus, the repeated and precise painting of hybrid gods was not creative liberty. It was ritual preservation of beings they believed existed. Every brushstroke was a resurrection, a reminder, a summoning of powers beyond human. The gods' hybrid faces were not masks, but warnings, reminders of the other. Consider the god Khnum, depicted with the head of a ram, shaping human beings on a potter's wheel. This image is not merely symbolic of fertility. It suggests intervention, a being shaping humans as clay, crafting them deliberately. Could Khnum represent an actual entity who manipulated life itself, whose memory survived as a god of creation? The paintings may not be abstract. They may be evidence of ancient bioengineering, encoded in myth. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, is another example. Her depictions radiate terror. She was the goddess of war and plague, a destroyer whose wrath was feared. But the lion's head is not just metaphorical power. It suggests a being whose visage truly resembled a lion. Imagine the impact on ancient people of encountering such a creature, walking upright, intelligent, commanding. The paintings of Sekhmet would then be less allegory, more historical record. They are portraits of a predator woman whose very appearance demanded worship. It is also significant that many hybrid gods were linked with stars and the heavens. Horus was tied to the sky, Thoth to the moon, Osiris to Orion, Isis to Sirius. If these beings were hybrids, their origins may not have been earthly at all. The paintings could be visual reminders that the gods came from beyond, their hybrid forms evidence of their otherness. The worship of stars in Egypt may thus have been less poetic and more literal, reverence for the homeworlds of the beings who once ruled here. Imagine for a moment the shock of discovery. An archaeologist, brushing sand from a temple wall, uncovers a painting fresh after thousands of years. A god stares back. Human body, but head unmistakably non-human. The scholar explains it as myth, symbolism, culture. But deep inside, another thought lingers. What if this was real? What if what I see is exactly what they saw? What if the ancients were not lying? This moment of silent hesitation is the crack in certainty, the whisper of truth breaking through stone. The persistence of hybrid imagery also raises questions about human psychology. If imagination alone were responsible, we would expect diversity, chaos of forms. Instead, we see stability, order, repetition. The falcon head of Horus is not distorted into creativity across centuries. It is preserved with sacred precision. This precision suggests memory, not invention. The Egyptians were not making things up. They were recording, protecting, remembering. Other civilizations recorded similar beings. In Sumerian reliefs, gods are often depicted with wings, helmets, and animal features. In Mesoamerican carvings, serpent men and bird-headed deities abound. Even in medieval Europe, bestiaries describe hybrid creatures with awe. The pattern is too widespread to dismiss. Egypt's paintings are not isolated. They are part of a global archive of hybrid memory. To ignore them as myth is to ignore humanity's consistent testimony across continents. Some futurists speculate that these beings may have been genetic experiments from an ancient advanced civilization. If humanity today can edit DNA to create hybrids of animals, how much more could a civilization with thousands of years of hidden knowledge achieve? The gods may not have been supernatural at all, but biological constructs, their hybrid forms the result of deliberate design. In this light, the paintings are evidence of a science we cannot yet fathom. The greatest irony is that the gods' hybrid depictions continue to inspire awe even now. Tourists stand beneath painted walls, snapping pictures, marveling at the beauty. They do not realize they are staring at testimonies of encounters lost to time. Scholars debate metaphor while the truth stares at them in paint and stone. The gods do not need to speak. Their images whisper louder than words. They say, "We were here. We walked among you. You painted what you saw." And so, when we gaze upon the hybrid gods of Egypt, we must ask, are we looking at myth, or are we looking at history hidden in plain sight? The answer may unsettle, but it is unavoidable. The Egyptians worshipped beings that were not human. Their paintings are not fantasy, but memory. Memory of a time when gods walked beside men, their hybrid faces etched forever into the walls of eternity. When the tombs of Egypt are opened, they often reveal treasures not of gold alone, but of symbols, amulets, charms, tiny objects meant to protect and guide the dead. Among these artifacts are shapes that seem ordinary to the casual eye. Small boats, carved in stone, fashioned in metal, painted on papyrus. Archaeologists call them solar barques, the boats of Ra, vessels that carried the sun across the sky. Yet, a closer look unsettles the certainty. Some of these amulets depict not riverboats, but forms sleek, curved, even winged, adorned with stars and celestial symbols. They look less like barges of the Nile, and more like vessels of the heavens. To the Egyptians, the afterlife was a journey. The soul was ferried across waters, guided by divine oarsmen, judged by hybrid gods. Boats symbolized passage, transition, the movement between worlds. Yet the so-called skyboats are different. They are aerodynamic, star-bound, built not for the Nile, but for eternity. If they were metaphors, why were they placed close to the dead, tucked beside the heart, as if essential to survival in the afterlife? You do not bury poetry with kings. You bury what you believe the soul will need. Consider the solar bark of Ra, painted across temple ceilings. It glides not across water, but across the sky, bearing the sun god as he battles serpents of darkness each night to rise again each morning. This image has been explained as myth. But what if it was memory? What if the Egyptians saw vessels streaking across the heavens, radiant, glowing, boats not of the Nile but of the stars? The amulets then are not symbols, they are miniatures, talismans of technology mistaken for divinity, carried into death to ensure safe passage. Imagine kneeling beside a sarcophagus, brushing dust from a tiny amulet shaped like a boat. Its curves gleam faintly, its wings extend outward. In your hand, it feels less like a river craft and more like a model of something aerodynamic. The priests who buried it believed it was necessary. Why? Did they think the soul needed to board a vessel not metaphorical, but literal, a craft that would ferry them from Earth to the stars, back to the gods from whom they descended? Some argue that skyboats are nothing more than symbolic representations of the sun's journey. Yet the Egyptians did not bury symbolic metaphors with such consistency. They buried tools, they buried maps, they buried spells inscribed on papyrus to guide the dead. They buried objects the soul was expected to use. If skyboats were among them, then the ancients believed these vessels were real, required, indispensable. The dead could not leave Earth without them. In Abydos, one of Egypt's most sacred sites, carvings on temple walls show images that some claim resemble modern aircraft, shapes that look like helicopters, planes, even spacecraft. Scholars dismiss these as overlapping inscriptions forming coincidences, but in the same sacred precinct, amulets of skyboats were found, reinforcing the idea that Egyptians associated the heavens not only with gods, but with machines. Could it be that what we see as coincidence is in fact persistence, memory etched in stone and preserved in talisman? The skyboats also appear in the pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world. The deceased king is instructed to board the sun bark, to sail across the sky to join the gods. The language is specific. The boat rises, it glides, it carries the soul into the stars. This is not the imagery of a metaphorical canoe. This is the description of a vehicle, and if amulets were buried to represent it, then Egyptians believed the vehicle existed. Imagine the psychological impact on ancient people of seeing a craft streak across the sky, glowing, descending, ascending again. They would not have the word airplane, nor spaceship. They had only the Nile, so they described what they saw as boats, sky boats. They carved them, painted them, buried them. They remembered the vessels of their gods, vehicles not of earth. The amulets are echoes of this memory, small enough to hold in the hand, powerful enough to guide the soul. Skeptics argue that we are projecting modern imagination onto ancient art. But the detail of some skyboat amulets challenges this. Some show curved hulls with no oars, no sails, as if propelled by unseen force. Others depict wings, arcs, or flame-like motifs trailing behind, reminiscent of propulsion. If purely symbolic, why such mechanical detail? Why not simple boats with paddles? The imagery suggests something beyond metaphor, something witnessed and preserved. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, among the treasures, were small shrines and amulets depicting boats meant to guide him in the afterlife. If the boy king's lineage was tied to hybrid gods, as some evidence suggests, then perhaps these boats were not symbolic gifts, but literal maps back to his ancestral home. Perhaps the soul of the pharaoh was believed to return not to the Nile, but to the stars. The amulets then were passports, tickets to the heavens. Consider the broader mythology. The stars were not distant lights to the Egyptians, but homes. The goddess Isis was linked to Sirius, Osiris to Orion. Ra sailed across the sky daily. If the gods lived among the stars, then vessels were required to reach them. Boats were the closest analogy, but the amulets show details inconsistent with rivercraft. They look aerodynamic, celestial. They look like machines. Now imagine this scene. A high priest stands in the flickering light of a burial chamber. He places amulets beside the body, whispering spells. Among them, he sets a tiny skyboat, its form gleaming. He believes, with absolute certainty, that when the soul awakens, it will board this vessel. He believes the gods will send a craft, as they always did, to retrieve their own. He believes death is not an end, but a return voyage. Thousands of years later, archaeologists find the amulet and call it symbolic. The priest would laugh at such blindness. Other cultures mirror this imagery. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki descending in skyships. The Mayans recorded feathered serpents gliding across the heavens. The Greeks told of chariots of the gods. Across the world, humans remembered vessels that linked earth and sky. Egypt's skyboats fit this chorus, their amulets part of a larger memory. Humanity saw the same things and described them in the only words they had. The burial of amulets is especially telling. Egyptians placed in tombs only what was necessary for the afterlife: food models, shabti servants, protective spells. If skyboats were among these essentials, then the dead required them. No one buries mere poetry. They bury tools. The amulets are therefore not symbols of imagination, but instruments of belief. They ensured passage because passage was real. Even the architecture echoes this. The shape of some temples and tomb passages resemble runways, straight corridors aligned with stars. The Great Pyramid's shafts point to Orion and Sirius, star systems linked to Osiris and Isis. Were these alignments symbolic, or or functional launch paths for souls departing aboard skyboats. The amulets may have been personal guides, while pyramids were cosmic gateways. Let us step deeper into the mythology of Ra's nightly voyage. Each evening, the sun god entered the underworld aboard his bark, facing serpents of chaos, demons of shadow, and gates guarded by monstrous beings. At dawn, he emerged victorious, rising again into the sky. On temple walls, this is depicted as an actual journey aboard a vessel. The amulets buried with the dead, then, are not symbolic trinkets. They are tickets, ensuring the soul could join Ra's crew on his cosmic voyage. The implication is clear. The afterlife was not a dream, but a journey aboard a vessel through realms unseen. Now imagine, for a moment, how such stories began. A shepherd watches the desert night sky. Suddenly a glowing object cuts across the heavens, its shape curved, radiant, unlike anything he has ever seen. It hovers, descends, ascends again, disappearing among the stars. He has no word for it but boat, the only vessel he knows. He tells others. Over time, memory crystallizes into myth into ritual, ritual into amulet. The skyboats become central to death itself, because death was seen as return to the stars. Archaeologists uncover amulets shaped like boats and dismiss them as symbolic. But imagine holding one in your hand. It's designed too aerodynamic for the Nile, its proportions closer to something that might glide through air. Imagine realizing that the people who carved it saw something beyond their age. The chill that runs through you is not from superstition, but from the realization that myth and technology are not opposites. They are intertwined. Other civilizations mirror this obsession. The Norse spoke of Naglfar, the ship that carried gods during Ragnarok, a vessel not of sea, but of destiny. The Polynesians spoke of canoes that crossed not oceans, but skies. In Hindu mythology, Vimanas carried gods across the heavens, described with detail uncanny for mere imagination. Egypt's skyboats are not isolated symbols. They are one voice in humanity's global memory of celestial craft. What if these skyboats were not only vessels for gods, but also for rulers? Pharaohs claimed descent from the gods. Perhaps, at death, they were meant to return to their origin. Perhaps amulets of skyboats were tokens for the voyage home, a reminder that the gods would not abandon their children. If so, then every amulet buried in a tomb is not a symbol of the afterlife, but of ancestry beyond Earth. The philosophical question is haunting. If skyboats were real, then humanity's relationship with the gods was not spiritual alone, but technological. Worship was not only prayer, but protocol. Priests were not only shamans, but technicians of a forgotten science. Amulets were not charms, but access keys, ensuring souls could board the vessels of the divine. To call them myth is to blind ourselves to the possibility that ancient people were recording encounters we still struggle to comprehend. And so, the amulets sit in glass cases, dismissed as symbols. Yet they whisper to those who listen. They tell of journeys across the heavens, of gods in vessels, of souls ferried back to the stars. They remind us that death to the Egyptians was not the end, but the return. And they leave us with a question that lingers like a shadow in the tombs. Were the gods truly gods, or travelers? And if travelers, will they one day return for the descendants of those who once buried skyboats with their dead? In the ancient halls of Egypt, knowledge was guarded not by kings, but by priests. These men of ritual, mathematics, and astronomy recorded secrets in scrolls hidden from the public, words reserved only for the initiated. Among these guarded records are whispers of rulers who were not born of earth, but of stars. They are described as star-born, beings whose origin lay not in the villages of the Nile, but in the heavens above. When priests wrote of such kings, they did not write in metaphor. To them, these were truths, dangerous and sacred, to be preserved for eternity, but concealed from common ears. The Egyptians believed their pharaohs were divine, not metaphorically divine, but literally descended from the gods. Inscriptions repeat this claim with unwavering confidence. The king is the son of Ra, the child of Osiris, the heir of Horus. Scholars call this propaganda, political theater meant to justify power. But what if the priests were not lying? What if they were recording a truth too vast for modern historians to accept? If kings were star-born, then their bloodlines carried something alien, something not entirely human. This belief explains the extraordinary reverence, the godlike authority, the willingness of millions to toil for monuments. The people were not serving a man. They were serving a being of another world. Imagine a temple chamber lit only by oil lamps, the walls covered in hieroglyphs. A priest bends over a scroll, his reed pen scratching across papyrus. He writes not for the people, not even for the king, but for the gods. His words preserve a lineage that reaches into the sky. He writes of a pharaoh whose mother was visited by a being of light, whose body was shaped by hands not of earth. He writes carefully, for to reveal too much to common men would be dangerous. These are records for eternity, not for the moment. He knows one day others will read them. Perhaps they will understand. The pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead all contain passages where kings are described as ascending to the stars, joining their brothers in the sky, sailing on Ra's barque to dwell with Orion and Sirius. These are not casual metaphors. They are declarations of origin. The stars were not destinations for the dead, but homelands for the divine. Priests wrote that kings returned to where they came from, and where they came from was not Earth. The star Sirius was sacred to Egypt, marking the flooding of the Nile, the renewal of life. But it was more than astronomical. Priests linked it with the goddess Isis, mother of kings. Orion was linked to Osiris, god of resurrection, ruler of the afterlife. When priests wrote that pharaohs would ascend to Orion, they were not mapping the sky. They were mapping ancestry. Orion was not a constellation. It was a homeland. Sirius was not a star. It was a birthplace. Star-born kings were not poetry. They were genealogy. Consider Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who abandoned Egypt's gods for the worship of Aten, the sun disk. His depictions are strange: elongated head, narrow face, wide hips. Scholars debate whether this was artistic style or genetic anomaly, but priests of his time described him as more than man, as chosen of the heavens. His family, depicted with elongated skulls, resembles beings described in myths as children of the stars. If Akhenaten was star-born, then his radical break with tradition may not have been madness. It may have been memory. Skeptics argue that star-born is a metaphor for divinity. But Egyptians had countless ways to describe divinity, countless titles and epithets. The precision of born of stars is striking. It is not vague. It is not allegory. It is a statement of origin. To be star-born is to be of another place, another realm. Priests, the guardians of truth, chose their words carefully. They were not poets. They were record keepers. If they wrote star-born, it is because they meant it. Imagine the coronation of a king. Priests chant hymns in temples. They declare him son of Ra, heir of Osiris, child of Isis. The people hear poetry. But in the hidden chambers, in scrolls sealed away, priests write something different. They record that the king's blood carries a spark from beyond, that his ancestors descended in vessels of light, that his body is part of a lineage not bound to earth. This truth is hidden, reserved for priests alone, for to share it openly would shatter order. Other cultures mirror this language. In Sumer, kings were described as chosen of the Anunnaki, beings from the heavens. In India, rulers were called children of the gods, avatars descended from celestial realms. In Mesoamerica, kings traced their lineage to star serpents. Across the globe, priests wrote of rulers not as men, but as hybrids, star-born. Egypt was part of this universal memory. Its priests were not unique in preserving it. They were simply among the most precise. Imagine the psychological weight of believing your king was not human, but star-born. To obey him was not only politics, but destiny. To rebel was not treason, but blasphemy. This belief cemented authority stronger than armies. If the king was of the stars, his power was unquestionable. The priests who preserved and reinforced this belief were not deceiving the people. They were reminding them of what they considered fact, that Egypt was ruled by those who came from elsewhere. The tomb inscriptions deepen the mystery. Some kings are described not as dying, but as returning. He ascends to the imperishable stars, reads one text. He joins his fathers in the sky. Death is framed not as end, but as homecoming. The amulets buried with kings reinforce this. Amulets of skyboats, wings, stars. Everything points to the same idea. The pharaoh's journey is not downward into earth, but upward into sky. His origin and his destiny are written in stars. Imagine archaeologists uncovering a papyrus sealed in a forgotten tomb. The scroll, brittle, bears words never meant for public eyes. The king came from the star of Isis. His seed was planted in the womb of a queen. He is of two worlds. Such a find would shatter history. Yet fragments like this exist in the pyramid texts, disguised by translation, dismissed as metaphor. Scholars fear to read them literally, for to do so would unravel human history. Priests also wrote of rituals meant to call down the star beings. In some temples, astronomical ceilings depict constellations aligned with shafts of pyramids. Were these rituals not prayers, but signals? Were the priests communicating with the origin of their kings, maintaining contact with those who first descended? If so, then Starborn was not only lineage, but connection. The priests were gatekeepers of interstellar diplomacy. Let us look closer at the coronation texts. Priests declared that kings ascended the throne not merely as rulers, but as incarnations of the divine. One hymn describes the pharaoh as a star that has come down from the sky, lighting the two lands. This is not vague poetry. It is identity. The king is explicitly identified with a celestial origin. He is not just chosen by the gods, he is born of them. His body carries their essence. His bloodline is their bloodline. In the Temple of Dendera, astronomical ceilings depict the constellations in vivid detail. Among them, the king is shown rising with the stars, his form merging with Orion, his destiny tied to Sirius. The priests who carved these ceilings were not artists indulging in imagination. They were astronomers, mathematicians, custodians of cosmic knowledge. If they inscribed that the king was starborn, they did so with intention. For them, the heavens were not distant. They were the king's true home. Imagine the ordinary Egyptian farmer hearing these proclamations. To him, the stars were eternal, unchanging, untouchable. To know that his ruler came from them was to accept that the pharaoh was beyond question. The priests reinforced this belief with ceremony, embedding it in every ritual, every prayer. The king's starborn identity was not a secret, but a sacred truth, binding society together under the aura of the cosmic. And yet, in the hidden records, the priests wrote with even greater precision, preserving the truth of descent. This belief also explains the obsession with preservation. Why were pharaohs mummified with such care, their bodies wrapped in linen, their faces covered in gold masks? If they were starborn, then their bodies were not mere human shells. They were sacred vessels of alien heritage. To preserve them was to preserve a fragment of the divine. Perhaps the priests believed that one day the star beings would return and the preserved bodies of their children would rise again to join them. There are also clues in the rituals of ascent. Texts describe the opening of the mouth ceremony, where priests performed rites to awaken the king in the afterlife. But the language is peculiar. It speaks of enabling the king to speak to the stars, to breathe the air of heaven, to walk upon the road of light. This does not sound like simple metaphor. It sounds like preparation for interstellar voyage. The amulets of sky boats, the shafts of pyramids aligned with constellations, the rituals of ascent, all point to a literal journey. Other civilizations echoed this starborn kingship. The Sumerians recorded that Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a hybrid of gods and men. The Mayans traced their ruler's lineage to serpents of the sky. The Dogon people of Africa told of visitors from Sirius, the very star sacred to Egypt. Everywhere the same story. Rulers came from the stars, and priests preserved this truth. Egypt's priests were simply among the most disciplined in documenting it. Imagine, then, what it would mean if these writings are taken literally. The mummies in museums are not merely the ancestors of modern humans. They are descendants of star beings, their DNA carrying signatures not of this earth. Modern science, when it brushes against this possibility, recoils. Tests are halted. Results are buried. Yet the priests told us long ago, these kings are star-born. The evidence has been waiting all along, written in stone, preserved in ritual. The philosophical consequences are profound. If kings were star-born, then humanity's history is not isolated. We are part of a larger cosmic story. Egypt was not simply the cradle of civilization, but a colony, an outpost, a meeting place between earth and sky. The pyramids were not only tombs, but beacons. The temples were not only sanctuaries, but star maps. The priests were not only custodians of religion, but chroniclers of a hybrid dynasty. Picture again the priest writing in silence. His pen scratches on papyrus, recording what cannot be spoken aloud. He writes of a king who came from the stars, who returned to them upon death. He knows his words may never be read by common men, but he writes anyway, for truth must be preserved. Thousands of years later, archaeologists uncover fragments of his work. They read the words and dismiss them as metaphor, but perhaps one day someone will read them as he intended, and when that happens, history will fracture, and truth will emerge. And so, the phrase "starborn" lingers, carved in stone, written on papyrus, whispered in temples. It is a phrase that refuses to vanish, no matter how many times it is dismissed as myth. It reminds us that perhaps our rulers were not entirely of this earth. Perhaps their power was not simply political, but genetic, celestial. Perhaps Egypt's priests were telling us the greatest secret of all, that the pharaohs were the children of the stars, and through them, so too are we. Deep beneath the sands of Egypt lie tombs no hand has touched for thousands of years. Some are discovered and opened with ceremony, yielding treasures, mummies, and inscriptions. But others are found sealed, their entrances deliberately blocked, their passages filled with stone and mortar, their very presence hidden from the world. Archaeologists know they exist, yet many remain unopened, locked away in silence. Why? The official explanations speak of superstition, of dangerous collapses, of curses too melodramatic for science to accept. Yet, the persistence of these sealed tombs suggests something more deliberate, something darker. They were not closed to keep thieves out. They were closed to keep secrets in. The Egyptians were masters of preservation. They did not seal tombs lightly. To block an entrance with tons of stone, to carve warnings into walls, to hide the very location beneath false corridors and decoys, these were not acts of chance. They were choices. Choices made by priests, by kings, by those who knew what lay within. And sometimes, those choices seem less about protection and more about imprisonment. What then did they fear? What did they bury so carefully that they hoped no one would ever disturb? Legends of curses echo across history. The tomb of Tutankhamun was said to kill those who opened it. Other tombs bear inscriptions warning intruders that death awaits. But curses are not explanations. They are distractions. Behind the myth of curses lies a deeper truth. The Egyptians sealed tombs not only to protect the dead, but to protect the living from what the tombs contained. If the mummies inside were not human, if they bore secrets too shocking for the world, then sealing was not ritual, but quarantine, a silence imposed by stone. Imagine standing in a desert valley, staring at a cliff face where archaeologists have found a sealed tomb. Its entrance is hidden behind rubble, its passage filled in. No human has walked inside since the day it was closed. Why such effort? If it were merely to keep out robbers, why not disguise it, as so many tombs were? Why so deliberately seal it, as if to lock something away? The answer may be that these tombs held secrets not meant for eyes, secrets about the true nature of the beings who ruled Egypt. Consider the possibility that some tombs contained rulers who were visibly different. Elongated skulls, oversized frames, features too alien to pass as human. To preserve such bodies risked exposing the truth. To destroy them would be sacrilege. So, the priests chose another path, to seal them away, hidden for eternity. The tombs became prisons of truth, vaults where history's most dangerous secrets could be locked. Better to let them lie undisturbed than to reveal that Egypt's kings were not entirely of earth. Skeptics will say tombs are sealed because of structural collapse, because of unfinished construction, because of ritual. And yes, some may be. But when multiple tombs are deliberately filled, their passages blocked with precision, their entrances hidden, the explanation of accident fails. These are acts of will. The Egyptians did not do anything without purpose. Every stone, every carving, every seal had meaning. And the meaning here seems to be silence. Silence about what lay inside. There are stories from early explorers who pried open sealed tombs only to flee in terror. Some spoke of strange odors, not of decay, but of chemicals unknown. Others spoke of carvings unlike any seen elsewhere, depicting beings with faces too strange, proportions too inhuman. These accounts were dismissed, forgotten, lost in old journals. But the pattern repeats. The tombs most deliberately sealed often hint at something different. Not treasures, not curses, something stranger. Imagine what it would mean if one of these sealed tombs were opened today, not with superstition, but with science. Imagine archaeologists finding a body with DNA unlike ours, with bone structures unrecorded, with artifacts pointing not to Nile floods, but to stars. The revelation would shatter history. Religions would quake. Governments would panic. Museums would crumble under the weight of truth. Is it any wonder, then, that some tombs are left sealed? Better a mystery than a revolution of knowledge? The Valley of the Kings still holds unopened tombs. The sands of Saqqara conceal chambers not yet touched. Archaeologists admit there are thousands of undiscovered or unopened sites. Why such caution? Officially, it is funding, preservation, priority. Unofficially, there are whispers that opening some tombs risks exposing anomalies that cannot be explained. Better to delay forever than to reveal what the ancients locked away. Other civilizations echo this pattern. In China, the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, remains unopened, sealed under warnings of rivers of mercury. In South America, sealed chambers of the Nazca Desert remain untouched, filled with rumors of strange remains. Across the world, ancient cultures sealed what they feared. Egypt was not alone. The impulse to lock away dangerous truth seems universal. Imagine again the priests centuries ago. They stand in a tomb beside a body too strange, too powerful, too unlike a man. They argue. Some wish to destroy it. Others call that blasphemy. In the end, they decide to seal it, to bury the truth beneath stone. They chant spells, carve warnings, and close the entrance. The desert winds cover it. Centuries pass. Archaeologists stumble upon it, and still, even now, it remains closed. Their choice holds, their silence endures. Let us imagine one of these tombs, untouched for millennia. The entrance lies beneath a mound of sand, a faint crack in stone, hinting at the world beyond. To approach it is to feel dread, as if the desert itself warns intruders away. The priests who sealed it intended such dread. They carved warnings, invoked curses, not to frighten tomb robbers, but to repel the curious. For within lay something that could undo the fragile balance of the world above. Some scholars suggest that sealed tombs contain failed experiments, hybrids, malformed offspring of unions between humans and gods. To display such bodies would be to expose secrets that undermined the aura of divine perfection. Better to seal them, to deny their existence, to bury the evidence of imperfection. The priests, guardians of cosmic order, could not allow chaos to emerge. So, they entombed it. The seal became a veil of mercy. Others argue that sealed tombs held relics not of earth. Objects too advanced, too alien, too inexplicable. Machines mistaken for ritual, vessels mistaken for coffins. If such artifacts were ever found, they would reveal technologies the modern world is only beginning to imagine. To the ancients, these were sacred. To us, they would be destabilizing. Sealing them ensured that their power remained contained, their secrets hidden until the world was ready, or perhaps until it was too late. Imagine the day a sealed tomb is opened with modern technology. LiDAR scans the chamber before any stone is moved. Scientists peer into the darkness with robotic cameras, and what they see is not a human mummy, but something taller, stranger, preserved in linen, its proportions alien. Instruments detect metals unknown, alloys unrecorded. The news leaks, spreads, ignites panic. History collapses, religion trembles. Governments scramble to control the narrative. This is the nightmare priests feared. This is why they sealed the tombs. The act of sealing may also have been a ritual of imprisonment. Myths tell of gods who betrayed, who rebelled, who brought chaos. Perhaps their bodies, or what was left of them, were locked away, sealed so they could never rise again. The tomb was not a grave, but a prison, a cosmic lock to bind forces too dangerous. To open it would be to release what the ancients fought to contain. The warnings of curses may be less superstition, more literal instruction. Do not unseal, for what lies within is not meant to walk again. Even today, archaeologists sometimes choose not to open sealed chambers. They speak of preservation, of waiting for better technology. But Perhaps preservation is only part of the truth. Perhaps the hesitation is older than science. Perhaps it is instinct, a deep recognition that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. The silence of the sealed tombs, then, is a silence of protection. Across the world, we see similar patterns. The Mayans buried entire temples under new ones, sealing them away. The Incas sealed caves where strange mummies were rumored to lie. Even medieval monks built walls to hide forbidden relics. Humanity has always understood that some truths must be hidden. Egypt's sealed tombs are part of this universal pattern of suppression. Picture again the Valley of the Kings. Tourists swarm to the open tombs, marveling at painted walls, golden sarcophagi, mummified kings. But nearby, entrances lie untouched, sealed in stone. Guides pass by without mention. Scholars note them in journals, but move on. Why? Because opening them risks too much. Because within them lies not treasure, but revelation. And revelation is more dangerous than any curse. If one of these sealed tombs were to be opened and revealed not a human king, but a star-born being, our history would fracture. Textbooks would be rewritten. Religions would face crises. The story of humanity would expand beyond Earth. The priests who understood this chose silence. They chose to lock away the truth. Perhaps they believed that one day when humanity was ready, the tombs would be opened. Or perhaps they hoped they would never be. The philosophical weight of this is immense. To seal a tomb is to admit fear. To block it forever is to confess that what lies inside is too great, too dangerous, too transformative. Egypt's sealed tombs are therefore not only archaeological puzzles, they are ethical statements. They tell us that even the wisest of civilizations knew there were truths humanity could not yet bear. And so, the sands shift, the tombs wait, the seals hold, perhaps forever. Perhaps until curiosity outweighs caution, but until that day comes, they remain as they were intended, silent guardians of truths too vast for man. They are questions entombed in stone, answers hidden in darkness. Reminders that some doors remain closed, not because they cannot be opened, but because they should not be. In the golden sands of Egypt, beneath the ruins and monuments that speak of gods and kings, there are whispers of something stranger, reports of radiation near certain burial sites. Officially, such claims are dismissed as rumor, coincidence, contamination. But the whispers persist. Archaeologists have spoken in hushed tones of Geiger counters that click too quickly, of instruments that spike unexpectedly near sealed tombs, of strange burns suffered by workers who entered chambers too long closed. What modern science calls radiation, the ancients may have called the power of the gods. The ancient Egyptians did not know of radiation in the way we do. They did not speak of isotopes, decay, or atomic half-lives. Yet, their texts are filled with warnings of energy too dangerous to approach, of light that burns without fire, of power that belongs only to the gods. Could these be descriptions of the same force we now call radiation? And if so, why does it linger still, thousands of years later, in tombs buried deep beneath the sand? Imagine a burial chamber sealed for millennia. Inside rests a mummy not entirely human, wrapped in linen, adorned with strange metals. Perhaps the body itself emits something unusual. Perhaps artifacts within, amulets, stones, relics, carry materials unknown to Earth. When modern explorers approach, their instruments detect the invisible, radiation. The priests who sealed the tomb may have known of its danger, though not by science. They knew it killed, it burned, it poisoned. So they sealed it, carved warnings, and prayed it would never be disturbed. There are stories from early 20th century excavations where workers fell ill without explanation. Some died. Their symptoms, nausea, weakness, strange lesions, mirror radiation sickness. At the time, these were blamed on curses, on mold, on coincidence. But what if it was exposure to something real, something measurable, something ancient that should not have been there? The curse of the pharaohs may not be superstition, but contamination, the lingering echo of technology beyond our comprehension. Consider the possibility that artifacts buried with the dead were not symbolic, but functional. What if the skyboat amulets, the metallic objects, the stones inscribed with strange symbols, were fragments of machinery powered by forces unknown? Radiation may have been a byproduct, or even a deliberate safeguard. To protect these relics, priests sealed them in chambers, warning intruders of death. To those who ignored the warnings, death came not from gods, but from exposure. Skeptics insist that radiation near tombs must come from natural causes, uranium deposits in rock, cosmic particles trapped underground. And yes, geology can create such anomalies, but the pattern is unsettling. Radiation spikes occur most often near tombs, associated with rulers described as divine, star-born, or hybrid. It is not random, it is targeted. It is as though something in those tombs radiates still, long after it should have decayed. Imagine the terror of an archaeologist who lowers a Geiger counter into a sealed chamber. The clicks grow rapid, the needle spikes. They pull back, shaken, unable to explain. They close their notes, report nothing, for fear of ridicule. But the memory haunts them. They know what they saw. And in silence, the whispers spread. Egypt's tombs are not just haunted by curses. They are haunted by radiation. This possibility reframes the ancient myths. The Egyptians spoke of gods who glowed with light, who radiated power, who burned mortals with a touch. These may not be metaphors. They may be descriptions of beings surrounded by radiation, their presence hazardous, their artifacts still dangerous centuries later. Priests who served these beings would have known to fear their remnants. Their rituals of purification, their spells of protection, may have been not only spiritual, but practical, a way to shield themselves from energies they did not understand. Other civilizations record similar dangers. In India's Mahabharata, weapons of the gods unleashed light brighter than 1,000 suns, searing skin, poisoning rivers, descriptions eerily like nuclear weapons. In Mesopotamia, tales of divine fire that lingered for generations resemble fallout. If Egypt too carried such remnants, then radiation near burial sites is not anomaly, but confirmation of a larger pattern. The gods brought with them forces too powerful for mortals. Those forces remain. The philosophical implications are chilling. If radiation lingers in tombs, then the beings buried there were not human kings, but entities tied to technologies far beyond our understanding. Their bodies, their relics, their very presence was hazardous. To honor them, the Egyptians preserved them. To protect themselves, they sealed them away. What we call curses may simply be physics. What we call myth may simply be memory of exposure to energies ancient people could not name. Imagine again a priest, thousands of years ago, standing before a sarcophagus. He feels the burning on his skin, the sickness in his body. He does not know the word radiation. He knows only that this is the power of the gods, dangerous to mortals. He orders the tomb sealed. He inscribes warnings. He prays the chamber will never be disturbed. And for thousands of years, it is not. Until now. Until us. Let us dive deeper into the idea of curses that may have masked radiation. When Howard Carter uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, several members of his team died mysteriously. Lord Carnarvon, the financier, succumbed suddenly to an illness marked by fever and infection after a mosquito bite. Newspapers at the time screamed of curses. Modern historians point to bacteria or mold spores. But some accounts mention strange energies in the air, a tingling sensation, sudden weakness experienced by those who lingered too long in the chambers. The world called it superstition. But what if it was science unrecognized? What if the curse was radiation? Radiation could explain this. Invisible, tasteless, odorless, yet deadly. Imagine walking into a chamber sealed for 3,000 years, filled with artifacts emitting low levels of radiation. Hours pass, days. The exposure accumulates. Some die quickly. Others suffer lingering illnesses. To the ancients, this was divine punishment. To us, it may be measurable energy. If so, then Tutankhamun's curse was not a superstition at all, but the warning echo of physics. There are also reports from Saqqara, where sealed shafts lead down to chambers archaeologists hesitate to enter. Some who did in the 1960s and 70s wrote of nausea, headaches, dizziness, classic signs of exposure. Their journals were obscure, their voices silenced, their claims buried beneath skepticism. Yet, the stories align. Certain sites, especially those tied to unusual burials, carry this whisper of radiation. It is not every tomb. It is specific ones. Always the rulers called divine, the kings linked to stars. Imagine one of these sites at night. The desert is silent, stars stretching endlessly above. A team of researchers lowers instruments into a shaft. Suddenly, the detector begins to tick, slow at first, then faster. The team freezes. They exchange glances, the desert wind howls, they withdraw the device, and the ticking stops. They record nothing, for to report such an anomaly would invite ridicule, ruin careers. But privately, they know. Something is wrong down there, something that should not exist. If radiation is present, then what produced it? Some suggest natural uranium veins in rock. Yet, such deposits are rare in Egypt, and even when present, they do not align neatly with the most sacred burials. Others propose cosmic materials, meteor fragments buried with kings. Could the gods have carried radioactive substances as part of their technology, their power sources? If such artifacts were interred with their bodies, then their energy might still linger. What we dismiss as superstition could be the scar of ancient science. The myths, too, gain new light. Texts speak of gods with glowing crowns, bodies that shone with unbearable brilliance. Pharaohs were described as radiant, shining, dangerous to behold. Was this literal? Were they surrounded by energy that harmed those too close? Priests may have devised rituals, not as empty ceremony, but as protection, shielding themselves with distance, with masks, with layers of linen. They could not name radiation, but they knew its effects. They carved warnings because they understood the danger, even if they could not explain it. Across the globe, parallels emerge. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in India contain skeletons with radiation levels far above normal, as if they perished in a sudden fiery event. In Mesopotamia, tales of divine fire destroying cities mirror descriptions of fallout. In Central America, myths of gods descending in fiery chariots align with accounts of radiation sickness. Egypt's whispers of radiation are part of this tapestry, a global memory of energies beyond human comprehension. Now, imagine the philosophical weight of this truth. If tombs radiate even now, thousands of years later, then the beings interred were not like us. Their burial chambers were not passive monuments, but active reactors. Their artifacts carried power from the stars, power that endures beyond generations. This power may have been their defense, their curse, their legacy. It may also be their warning. To open their tombs is to step into forces we still fear today. Picture again the priest at the moment of sealing. He knows this body, this being, radiates danger. He feels it in his skin, in his bones. He orders stone piled high, corridors filled with rubble, warnings carved in stone. He chants words, not because words will protect, but because men need comfort in the face of forces they cannot name. The tomb is closed, the desert covers it, the danger sleeps. Until we return, arrogant and blind, modern archaeologists armed with science still hesitate. They frame their caution as preservation, but perhaps instinct whispers to them, just as it did to the priests. Instruments do not lie. Radiation spikes cannot be dismissed forever. One day, one of these tombs may be opened fully, its contents revealed. And when that day comes, the truth will no longer be whispers. It will be undeniable. Until then, the whispers remain. Of Geiger counters ticking in the desert night, of workers falling ill for no reason, of tombs sealed not by superstition, but by necessity. Radiation may yet prove the greatest curse of Egypt, not imagined, but real, a silent guardian that has waited millennia to remind us that the kings of Egypt were not like other men, that their tombs are not simply graves, but reactors of forgotten gods. When we think of burial in ancient Egypt, we imagine honor, reverence, the preservation of kings who were seen as gods. Tombs were monuments to eternity, filled with treasures, food, amulets, and art, meant to serve the dead in the afterlife. But what if some burials were not about honor at all? What if they were concealments? What if certain mummies were interred not to glorify their legacy, but to hide their true nature? This possibility unsettles everything we think we know about Egypt. To bury someone with pomp and secrecy is one thing, but to seal them beneath stone, to wrap their bodies in layers of linen, to cover their features with masks of gold, these are not just acts of reverence. They may be disguises. Disguises meant to ensure that no one ever looked too closely at what lay beneath. What if the mummies we admire in museums are not preserved kings, but hidden beings whose appearance was never meant to be seen? Consider the elongated skulls found in certain burials. Scholars dismiss them as deformities, the result of head binding or congenital anomalies. But if these skulls were truly natural, why preserve them so carefully? Why not conceal them? Unless the concealment was the very reason for mummification. Wrapping the head in linen, covering it with a mask, sealing it in a coffin larger than human proportion. These could all be methods of hiding, not honoring. The truth beneath the wrappings may have been too unsettling for the world above. Imagine walking into a chamber and seeing a sarcophagus unlike others, oversized, sealed tight, with inscriptions warning intruders away. Inside lies a body whose proportions stretch beyond human, whose skull is elongated, whose limbs are unnatural. The priests knew what this was. They preserved it, but they also hid it. They buried it not to glorify the being, but to ensure the world above never saw it. If these mummies were not human, then their true forms had to be concealed. The tombs became prisons of truth, monuments to secrecy rather than to glory. The Egyptians were masters of illusion and secrecy. Their temples hid chambers within chambers. Their pyramids contained false passages to mislead intruders. Their rituals were layered with meanings only priests understood. Why should their burials be any different? To enter a being who was not fully human may have required ceremony, but also deception. The wrappings, the masks, the sealed doors, these may have been part of an elaborate effort to cover the truth. Not all who were buried were kings. Some were something else entirely. The myths speak of gods who walked among men, beings of light and power who taught agriculture, astronomy, and writing. If such beings died or chose to leave remains, their bodies would not look like ours. To prevent panic, to maintain control, the priests may have buried them in the guise of kings. The people would worship the tombs, never knowing that within lay not a man, but a god, or something stranger still. The burial was a mask, a way to pass off the alien as divine, to protect both the secret and the society built upon it. Skeptics argue that all mummies are human, that anomalies are rare exceptions. But consider this. Why were some tombs sealed and never opened? Why do DNA tests sometimes stop without explanation? Why are certain coffins built too large, certain amulets depicting strange crafts, certain paintings showing hybrid beings? The pattern is clear. The priests buried beings who were different. They interred them to hide their nature, wrapping them in layers of myth and ritual. The world above saw monuments, the priests saw prisons. Imagine the psychological weight of such secrecy. Priests, standing in torchlight, staring at a body too strange to reveal, debating what must be done. Some argue it must be destroyed. Others call destruction sacrilege. In the end, they choose concealment. They wrap it in linen, mask its face in gold, bury it beneath stone, and seal the entrance. They chant spells not as praise, but as cover. They write inscriptions not as history, but as misdirection. And so, the truth is hidden, waiting for millennia. The preservation of such beings may have served another purpose. Perhaps they were interred not only to hide, but to preserve, so that one day if the gods returned, they could reclaim their own. The wrappings, the resins, the sealed chambers, all may have been not only concealment, but preservation. The beings inside were hidden from men, but preserved for gods. They were never meant for us. They were meant for those who came before, and who may come again. Other cultures echo this idea. In Sumer, tales of the Anunnaki describe gods who mingled with humans, whose remains were hidden in sacred sites. In Mesoamerica, elongated skulls were buried in secret chambers. In China, stories tell of emperors descended from dragons, their true forms concealed by burial masks. Across the world, the dead were sometimes hidden not because they were revered, but because they were dangerous. Egypt's mummies may be the most famous example, but they are not the only one. Now imagine archaeologists opening one of these tombs. They peel back layers of linen, expecting human features. But what they find is alien. Skull too long, eyes too wide, bones too dense. They recoil, stunned, their instruments buzzing with readings they cannot explain. They write cautious reports, but the truth never reaches the public. The discovery is hidden, just as the body was. The cycle of concealment continues. The true nature of the buried remains a secret, hidden not only by priests but by modern institutions unwilling to disrupt the fragile narrative of history. Let us explore more deeply the psychology of concealment. Why hide the truth instead of destroying it? Perhaps because destruction would anger the gods, perhaps because even in death, these beings radiated power, a presence that could not be erased. To burn them, to scatter their bones, might unleash forces too terrible to face. Concealment was safer. To enter them beneath stone, to disguise them with ritual, was to neutralize the danger without committing sacrilege. The priests balanced fear and reverence with calculation. Consider the masks of gold placed upon the faces of kings. These masks, beautiful and iconic, also served another purpose: to obscure. Beneath them, faces may not have looked human. The gold hid deformities or differences that would have revealed too much. To the people, the mask was divinity. To the priests, it was camouflage. Every mask we see in museums may be a veil, hiding not just decay, but identity. The true face beneath the mask may not belong to a man at all. The wrappings, too, tell a story. Egyptian mummification was elaborate, layer upon layer of linen soaked in resin, binding the body so tightly that its form was obscured. Why such obsessive covering? Was it purely preservation, or was it concealment, to prevent future eyes from seeing the truth beneath? Each layer was not only protection against decay, but a curtain against discovery. The mummy was a mystery wrapped in cloth, hidden from all but the gods. Imagine again the priests in their chamber. They look upon the being before them. Its skin perhaps pale, its skull elongated, its eyes uncomfortably large. They whisper in fear. The king is dead, but what he was must be hidden. They summon artisans who create masks and coffins to humanize what is not human. They seal the body away, layering stone upon stone, praying the sands will never give it up. Their rituals are not songs of honor, but incantations of concealment. The myths echo this practice. In the story of Osiris, his body is dismembered and hidden across Egypt, concealed so that none might wield his power. In the tale of Horus, the child of Isis is hidden in marshes to protect him from Seth. Concealment runs deep in Egyptian tradition. The gods themselves were hidden, their forms disguised, their powers veiled. The burial of strange beings may have been the ultimate expression of this pattern. The priests were not preserving history. They were preserving secrets. Skeptics will say there is no evidence, but evidence hides in plain sight. Oversized sarcophagi that make no sense for human remains. Sealed tombs that have never been opened. DNA studies halted without explanation. Artistic depictions of beings with elongated heads, hybrid forms, radiant skin. These are clues, fragments of truth scattered through history. Taken separately, they are anomalies. Taken together, they form a pattern of concealment. Other cultures knew this too. In Mesoamerica, rulers wore masks of jade to obscure their features in death. In China, burial shrouds of jade were said to trap the spirit, but perhaps they also concealed the body. In Mesopotamia, strange beings were depicted but rarely shown directly, always cloaked, always veiled. Humanity has long used art and ritual to obscure what should not be seen. Egypt perfected the practice. Now, picture the modern archaeologist peeling back linen from a mummy. Slowly, carefully, the wrappings fall away. At last, the skull emerges, elongated, unnatural. The eyes, once large, leave hollows too vast for a human face. The archaeologist freezes. He knows what he sees, but he cannot report it. The photographs are filed away, the discovery buried in archives. To reveal it would end careers, collapse narratives, unsettle civilizations. And so, the concealment continues, not only by priests, but by scholars and institutions. The philosophical weight is staggering. If the mummies were interred to hide their true nature, then our museums are houses of deception, filled with bodies that tell only half the story. The truth beneath the linen has been hidden not only by ancient priests, but by modern institutions unwilling to face the implications. We gaze upon the wrappings, the masks, the coffins, and think we see history. In reality, we see camouflage. And yet, concealment is never permanent. Sand erodes. Tombs crack. Secrets emerge. Already, whispers of elongated skulls, of strange DNA, of anomalies in burial practices have begun to surface. The truth cannot remain buried forever. One day, a tomb will be opened that cannot be explained away. One day, the linen will fall, the mask will crack, and the world will see what the priests sought to hide, and on that day, History will end as we know it. Perhaps the ancients understood this inevitability. Perhaps their concealment was not meant to last forever, but to delay, to buy humanity time, centuries of time, until we were ready to face the truth. Perhaps the wrappings and masks were not only camouflage, but warnings. Be cautious. Be patient. This truth is dangerous. If so, then the question is no longer whether the mummies were interred to hide their true nature. The question is whether we are ready to finally see it. Throughout the modern history of archaeology in Egypt, there have been moments of excitement, discovery, and revelation. Teams descend into the desert with cameras, lights, and tools, ready to uncover treasures hidden for thousands of years. But there have also been moments that end not in discovery, but in silence. Excavations that begin with promise suddenly halt. Announcements are postponed. Discoveries are locked away. Reports vanish. The question is, why? Why would a dig that costs millions, backed by governments and institutions, simply stop? Official explanations vary. Funding runs dry. Political instability interrupts. Conservation requires pause. These reasons seem logical, even mundane. Yet, the pattern is troubling. Some of the most promising sites, the ones rumored to contain sealed chambers, oversized sarcophagi, or anomalous remains, are often the very ones that are stopped abruptly. The timing raises suspicion. It is as if, once something unusual is uncovered, the work ends. The public hears nothing more. Silence swallows the truth. Take Saqqara, for example. In the 1990s, excavations revealed a series of shafts leading to chambers deep underground. Teams explored some, finding strange coffins and artifacts. Then, suddenly, work stopped. The reasons given were unclear. Rumors spread of radiation readings, of bodies with unusual proportions, of artifacts that did not fit known history. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing was denied. The shafts remain, silent and closed, their secrets untouched. Or consider the discovery beneath the Sphinx. In the 1970s and 80s, ground-penetrating radar detected cavities beneath the monument. Speculation raged about hidden chambers, perhaps even the fabled Hall of Records. Excavations began, with international teams eager to explore. Then, without explanation, the work halted. Officials claimed preservation. Others whispered of discoveries too dangerous to reveal. To this day, those chambers remain sealed. The mystery lingers, the silence deafening. There are also cases in the Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists announced new tombs, sealed for thousands of years. Excavations began, photographs circulated, expectations soared. Then, suddenly, nothing. The work stopped. The sites were closed. Journalists were barred. No reports emerged. When pressed, officials gave vague answers. Budget, conservation, timing. But whispers among workers spoke of anomalies, sarcophagi too large, inscriptions too strange, bodies too alien. Whether true or not, the effect was the same. Silence instead of revelation. Imagine the scene. A team of archaeologists descends into a newly opened chamber. Lights flicker against painted walls. Cameras record as dust swirls. They expect another mummy, another sarcophagus. Instead, they find something that shocks them. Perhaps a body with elongated skull. Perhaps artifacts that resemble machines. Perhaps inscriptions too advanced to fit history. They stare in silence, unable to speak. The cameras are switched off. Officials are called. Within days, the excavation halts. The public hears nothing. Another discovery buried in silence. This pattern is not unique to Egypt. Around the world, excavations that uncover anomalies are often silenced. In China, the tomb of the first emperor remains sealed, officials citing preservation, while whispers speak of mercury rivers. In South America, sealed caves with strange mummies are ignored. In Mesopotamia, digs that uncovered odd remains were halted. The pattern is global. When the dead do not match our expectations, silence follows. Skeptics insist the reasons are simple. Archaeology is expensive. Politics interfere. Preservation requires caution. These are valid points, but they do not explain why certain sites, always the most unusual, always the most potentially groundbreaking, are the ones that halt. They do not explain why reports vanish, why photographs disappear, why workers whisper of secrets buried again. Logic crumbles under the weight of coincidence. Silence becomes suspicious. Imagine again the archaeologist who sees too much. He writes a report detailing anomalies. His supervisors read it. Meetings are held. Officials arrive. The report is filed away, never published. He is warned to remain silent. His career depends on it. And so he does. His discovery joins countless others, hidden not in tombs, but in archives. The excavation ends. The world remains ignorant. The truth lies buried once more. Let us look closer at the Valley of the Kings, where tombs remain sealed even today. In 2006, archaeologists announced the discovery of KV-63, a chamber filled with coffins and jars. At first, excitement ran high. Was this the tomb of a royal child, a priest, or even a hidden queen? But within months, the excavation slowed, then stopped. Official statements said the coffins contained only embalming materials, not bodies. But whispers from workers suggested otherwise, that some of the containers held something unexplainable, something too strange to reveal. The same pattern appeared in Saqqara again. In the 2010 announcements were made of incredible finds. Sealed shafts filled with coffins untouched for millennia. Cameras filmed as coffins were opened. Some revealed beautiful mummies, richly adorned. But then, without warning, filming stopped. Journalists were ushered away. Days later, officials declared the dig complete, the discoveries cataloged. Yet, insiders spoke of one coffin, larger than the rest, that was never shown. Its contents remain unreported. Silence reigns again. And then there is the mystery of Giza's plateau. In the 1990s, seismic surveys revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx, vast cavities that could not be explained by natural geology. Some speculated these were storerooms of lost knowledge, perhaps even evidence of civilizations predating Egypt. Excavations began quietly, with international collaboration. Then, suddenly, silence. The chambers remain sealed. To this day, no one speaks of them. It is as if the earth itself swallowed the story. Why? The pattern is familiar. When anomalies emerge, work ends. Imagine for a moment that one of these excavations did reveal something extraordinary. A sarcophagus opened to show a body with bones thicker than ours, or a skull impossibly elongated, or artifacts glowing faintly in the dark. Cameras would capture it, workers would gasp, supervisors would panic. Within hours, officials would arrive, lights would be shut off, journalists escorted out. Within days, the site would be sealed again. The explanation would be vague: conservation, budget, stability. The truth would vanish into silence. Some archaeologists, late in life, have spoken obliquely of discoveries they were forbidden to publish. They tell of inscriptions describing beings from the stars, of artifacts that defied classification, of bodies that made them question everything. They cannot speak openly. Their careers, their reputations, their lives depended on silence. Yet, in their words, in their hesitant pauses, the truth flickers. Excavations that stop suddenly often do so because the world is not ready for what they revealed. The parallel to the priests of Egypt is striking. Thousands of years ago, priests sealed tombs to hide beings too strange, too dangerous, too otherworldly. Today, archaeologists and officials do the same. The tools have changed. Excavators instead of chisels, reports instead of papyrus, but the purpose is the same: to protect humanity from truths it cannot handle, to preserve order, to keep the illusion intact. The ancients hid the bodies with linen and gold. We hide them with silence and bureaucracy. The question becomes, how many times has this happened? How many excavations ended quietly because something was found that could not be explained? How many discoveries lie in warehouses, hidden in crates, filed away in basements of museums? We imagine archaeology as discovery, but perhaps it is also suppression. For every mummy displayed, another may be concealed. For every tomb opened, another may be quietly sealed. The story of Egypt may be only half told, the other half too dangerous to reveal. Consider also the role of modern governments. Egypt's tourism industry depends on stability, on wonder without controversy. A discovery that challenges human history, that suggests pharaohs were not human at all, would shake the foundations of religion, politics, and global order. The safest course is silence. Excavations that stumble upon such evidence are shut down quickly, their findings sealed away as effectively as the tombs themselves. What we call sudden halts may in fact be deliberate choices, modern equivalents of ancient seals. Other nations follow similar practices. In Turkey, in Peru, in China, excavations that suggest anomalies often vanish from the news. Scientists are silenced, funding is cut, permits revoked. The pattern is everywhere. Humanity has always sealed away the inconvenient. The ancients used stone. We use institutions. But the purpose is the same, to bury what cannot be faced. Imagine again the desert night. A team has just uncovered something extraordinary. The air is tense, electric. Whispers spread among the workers. Some take photographs, others record measurements. Then, headlights appear on the horizon. Officials arrive, stern-faced. The site is shut down. Workers are dismissed. The team is sworn to secrecy. Cameras are confiscated. Within days, the discovery vanishes. The public hears nothing. The silence is as thick as the desert sand, covering everything. The philosophical implications are haunting. If excavations stop when anomalies are found, then we are not uncovering the past, we are editing it. History is curated, shaped not only by what is discovered, but by what is hidden. We live not with the truth of Egypt, but with a version deemed safe. The priests of old and the officials of today serve the same role, guardians of secrets too immense for the world to see. The difference is that the ancients buried truths in stone, while the moderns bury them in silence. And so, the next time you hear of a discovery in Egypt, an announcement of a new tomb, a sealed chamber, a coffin untouched for millennia, remember the pattern. If the story fades, if the cameras vanish, if silence falls, ask why. Ask what was found that could not be told. For the truth of Egypt may not lie only in what we have seen, but in what we were never allowed to see. The mummies of Egypt may not only have been interred to hide their true nature, modern excavations may stop for the same reason, because the truth is still too dangerous to reveal. The mummies of Egypt are often thought of as relics, bodies preserved, dried, and silent, frozen forever in the grip of time. Yet what if they are not silent? What if, beneath the wrappings, their bodies still hold active secrets, secrets not yet understood, secrets that could alter everything we know about life, death, and humanity itself? The possibility changes everything. A mummy is not only a corpse, it is a capsule, a vessel sealed by ritual and time, carrying with it mysteries that may still be alive in ways we have yet to comprehend. Consider the technology of mummification itself. The process was not merely about drying flesh and preserving form. It was about controlling decay, halting nature's advance. Priests removed organs, replaced them with resins, anointed the body with oils, wrapped it in linen, placed amulets at precise points. These were not random acts. They were formulas, codes of preservation that we barely understand even today. Could those formulas have locked within the body more than we realize? Could they have preserved not just tissue, but powers, codes, or energies that remain active? Some scientists have tested fragments of mummy tissue and found traces of DNA that remain viable. Others have discovered chemical compounds within the wrappings that resist bacteria, compounds with properties we have not fully studied. The ancients may have stumbled upon or inherited methods of preservation far ahead of their time. But what if preservation was only part of it? What if the bodies themselves were preserved because they contained something still active, something dangerous, something too valuable to lose? Imagine a body wrapped thousands of years ago, still containing cells unlike ours, cells that repair themselves, resist decay, or generate energies unknown to modern biology. To unwrap such a mummy could be to release secrets locked for millennia, secrets that might cure diseases, or unleash plagues, or reveal origins not of this earth. The priests who preserved the bodies may have known this. They may have worked not only to honor the dead, but to guard their power, to ensure their secrets endured. The mummies may be prisons of knowledge as much as monuments of reverence. There are whispers that some mummies, when tested, showed anomalies, higher radiation levels, unusual isotopes in the bones, strange metallic implants beneath wrappings. Officially, these results are dismissed or unreported, but the rumors persist. What if these bodies are not passive remains, but active repositories? Batteries of ancient power, holding within them technologies or genetics we barely comprehend. Could their bodies still hum with energies, waiting to be rediscovered? Myths across cultures speak of bodies that retain power after death. Saints whose corpses refuse to decay. Kings whose tombs radiate curses. Gods whose remains glow or burn those who approach. In Egypt, too, the idea recurs. Texts speak of light in the flesh, power in the bones, life force in the blood. Perhaps these are not metaphors. Perhaps they are observations, echoes of the truth that the bodies themselves carried something active, something dangerous, something divine. Now imagine scientists daring to study one of these mummies with modern tools. They extract tissue, analyze it under a microscope. What they find is not ordinary human DNA. It is longer, more complex, filled with sequences we cannot identify. Or perhaps they detect nanostructures, metallic traces woven into bone, suggesting biotechnologies integrated into the body. Such discoveries would rewrite not only biology, but history. They would prove that these beings were not human, or not entirely human. They would prove that the priests were not simply preserving their kings, but concealing entities whose very flesh carried secrets too vast for humanity to face. Skeptics would say the anomalies are contamination, error, coincidence, but the pattern is hard to ignore. The elongated skulls, the oversized coffins, the amulets depicting skyboats, the depictions of hybrid beings, all point to a possibility larger than coincidence. And if these beings were not human, then their bodies may still carry active traces of what they were, traces that science has yet to uncover, traces hidden by priests who understood enough to fear them. The philosophical weight of this is immense. If the bodies still hold active secrets, then history is not simply about the past. It is about potential futures locked in ancient flesh. The mummies are not only monuments, they are time capsules of power. What they contain could heal or destroy, enlighten or terrify. To study them is to risk unleashing forces we cannot control. To leave them sealed is to live in ignorance. Either choice carries danger. Imagine again the priests at the moment of burial. They know the body before them is not like others. It radiates something, carries a presence too great to discard. They wrap it in linen, place amulets over its chest, seal it in stone. They chant spells not only for honor, but for containment. The burial is not merely preservation, it is containment. The body is sealed not because it is dead, but because it is still active, still potent, still dangerous. Some legends suggest that even today, certain tombs carry energies that affect those who enter. Workers fall ill. Explorers feel weakness. Instruments malfunction. These could be coincidences, or they could be signs that the bodies within are not inert. They still hold active secrets, energies that spill beyond their stone prisons. The curses of Egypt may not be myths. They may be science we have yet to understand, forces locked in flesh that still whispers of the stars. Let us dive deeper into what active secrets could mean. One possibility is biological. If the beings buried in Egypt were not entirely human, their DNA might still contain fragments of alien code, sequences unknown to modern science. Already, studies of human genomes reveal stretches we do not understand, labeled junk DNA. But what if that junk is simply unrecognized? What if the mummies contain sequences that unlock new capabilities, longer lifespans, resistance to disease, cognitive abilities beyond our own? The priests may not have understood DNA, but they may have understood that these bodies were not ordinary, and thus had to be preserved, hidden, contained. Another possibility is energetic. Some reports speak of faint electromagnetic fields detected near certain coffins. Instruments behave erratically, compasses spin, batteries drain. Could the bodies themselves still generate or store energy? The resins, metals, and stones used in mummification may have acted as conductors, creating a system that preserved not only the body, but the energy within it. To unwrap such a mummy might be to unleash a field carefully contained for millennia. Then there is the possibility of infection. Some have speculated that ancient tombs hold pathogens unknown to modern science. If the beings buried were not human, their microbiology could be radically different. To expose it could unleash plagues we cannot fight. Perhaps the priests knew this. Perhaps their rituals were less about afterlife and more about quarantine. To seal the body was to seal the threat. The curse of the pharaohs may have been less superstition and more biological reality. Imagine again a mummy unwrapped under bright laboratory lights. Scientists expect desiccated tissue, silent bone. Instead, they find something still potent. Cells that resist decay, tissues that glow faintly under certain frequencies, molecules unknown to chemistry. The laboratory falls silent. The implications are staggering. This is not a body. This is a library. A living archive sealed in flesh, carrying knowledge we do not yet possess. Knowledge that could change everything. And yet, knowledge cuts both ways. The secrets could heal or harm. A genetic sequence that grants resilience could also create domination. A compound that preserves tissue could also create poison. A field of energy could power cities, or destroy them. The bodies are not just historical artifacts, they are vaults of power, and power is always dangerous. Consider how myths align with this. Egyptian texts speak of the Ka, the vital essence that lingers after death. The Ba, the personality, could fly as a bird. The Akh, the shining spirit, could radiate light. These were not abstract ideas. They may have been attempts to describe what priests saw, the bodies themselves glowing, humming, radiating presence. To them, this was divinity. To us, it may be physics. The active secrets of the body were framed as soul and spirit, but perhaps they were biological, energetic realities that science has yet to decode. Other civilizations echo this theme. In Mesopotamia, kings were said to hold me, divine powers embodied in physical form. In India, yogis were said to transform their bodies into light. In the Christian tradition, relics of saints are said to perform miracles. The body has always been seen as more than flesh. Egypt's mummies may be the pinnacle of this belief, that the body, preserved correctly, still holds the divine essence, still radiates secrets beyond death. Now, imagine the philosophical implications. If bodies still hold active secrets, then death is not the end. The flesh remains a vessel, a container of forces beyond decay. This changes how we see mortality, how we see legacy, how we see ourselves. The mummies are not dead. They are sleeping vessels, still whispering truths we have not dared to hear. Picture again the priests in the tomb, torches flickering, shadows dancing on stone walls. They feel the presence of the body before them. It hums. It radiates. It unsettles. They wrap it, not just to preserve, but to shield. They place amulets, not just as decoration, but as locks. They seal the chamber, not just as ritual, but as quarantine. They know the body still holds power. They fear what will happen if it is released, so they bury it and pray the sands will never give it up. Modern science, too, senses this. Instruments record anomalies. Researchers whisper of DNA sequences they cannot publish. Museums hold artifacts they cannot display. Silence spreads, just as it did in ancient times. The priests buried the truth in stone. Today, we bury it in bureaucracy. But the principle is the same. Some bodies are too dangerous to reveal. Some secrets are too active to expose. And yet, secrets never stay buried forever. Sand shifts, tombs crack, technology advances. One day, the secrets within the bodies will be revealed, and when that day comes, humanity will face a choice: to use the knowledge for healing or for destruction, to embrace the truth of our origins, or to deny it. The mummies wait, silent and sealed, carrying within them secrets still alive, secrets that may change everything we know about what it means to be human. When we speak of Egypt's legacy, we think of the pyramids rising against the horizon, the Sphinx staring endlessly across the desert, the hieroglyphs etched in stone. We think of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine that echo into modern science. We think of kings and queens immortalized in gold, their mummies preserved for eternity. But what if humanity is not Egypt's only legacy? What if something else, something not entirely human, was also left behind? Something buried in tombs, hidden in myths, preserved in bodies and artifacts too strange to explain. Consider the possibility that Egypt was more than the cradle of civilization. What if it was also a laboratory, a meeting ground between humanity and beings not of this earth? The evidence whispers from the sands: elongated skulls, oversized coffins, paintings of hybrid beings, amulets that look like machines. These anomalies suggest that Egypt's true legacy may not be just the civilization we inherited, but another lineage, hidden, preserved, or perhaps waiting. The myths themselves hint at it. The gods of Egypt were not distant figures in the sky. They walked among men, ruled as kings, intermarried with mortals. Osiris, Isis, Horus, Thoth. They were not intangible deities. They were described as physical beings, radiant, powerful, sometimes terrifying. What if they were not gods in the abstract, but a different species altogether? If their blood mixed with ours, then humanity may carry traces of them still. In that sense, Egypt's legacy is not only pyramids and hieroglyphs, it is bloodlines that whisper of origins beyond Earth. Now imagine tombs sealed for millennia, containing not just mummies of human kings, but the remains of beings who were something more. Their DNA may still linger in bone and hair, holding secrets of biology far beyond ours. Perhaps the priests preserved them not out of reverence, but out of necessity, to maintain the genetic record, to hold on to fragments of a legacy that was never fully human. If uncovered, these remains could prove that Egypt's legacy is not just cultural, but biological, a mingling of worlds and flesh itself. Consider, too, the artifacts, amulets shaped like boats that sail the sky, carvings of beings with animal heads and human bodies, inscriptions that speak of star-born kings. These may not be symbols or metaphors, but memories, records of interactions with beings who left behind more than myths. They left knowledge, technology, perhaps even offspring. Egypt's legacy may include a hidden branch of life itself, a lineage we have not yet acknowledged. Some archaeologists whisper of discoveries that never see the light of day, artifacts locked in warehouses, DNA tests halted, tombs sealed again after being opened. If these stories are true, then the guardians of history are protecting more than cultural treasures. They are protecting the truth that Egypt's legacy is not only ours. It belongs also to those who came before, those who may not have been human. The silence surrounding these discoveries is itself a clue. The priests sealed tombs. Modern institutions seal reports. The pattern is the same. Imagine the implications. If Egypt's legacy includes beings not of this earth, then humanity is not alone in its heritage. Our species may share its origins with others, mingled in ways we cannot fully trace. The myths of gods interbreeding with mortals, the tales of divine kingship, may be literal. If so, then part of what makes us human is not entirely human. Part of our legacy belongs to them. Egypt's legacy, then, is not only civilization, but hybridization. Not only culture, but lineage. The philosophical weight of this is staggering. We like to think of humanity as singular, as the pinnacle of history. But what if we are not alone even within ourselves? What if our DNA carries echoes of Egypt's gods, traces of another people, another species, another legacy? Then, Egypt is not just the story of humanity's rise, it is the story of humanity's entanglement with something greater, something older, something beyond. Other cultures tell similar stories. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were said to rule as kings, mingling with humans. In Greece, the gods took mortal lovers, producing demigods. In Mesoamerica, feathered serpents taught agriculture and astronomy. Everywhere, myths speak of beings who were not human, yet left legacies in blood and stone. Egypt's myths fit this pattern perfectly. Perhaps Egypt was the place where such legacies were preserved most deliberately, encoded in ritual, entombed in stone, waiting for rediscovery. Now picture a future excavation, deep in the Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists open a tomb long sealed. Inside, they find not only golden masks and wrapped bodies, but something stranger, a body with DNA not fully human. Artifacts that resemble technology, not ritual. Inscriptions that describe not an afterlife, but a homeland among the stars. The discovery would shatter history. Egypt's legacy would expand beyond humanity. We would know that we are not alone and that we never were. Perhaps the priests knew this. Perhaps they preserved the bodies and artifacts not for worship, but for safekeeping. They sealed the tombs not to honor the dead, but to protect the living from truths too immense to bear. Egypt's legacy, then, is twofold: the civilization it gave to humanity and the secrets it hid for another time. A legacy of stone and science, of human kings and non-human beings, of truths waiting for the day when humanity is ready to face them. Let us dive deeper into this haunting possibility. If Egypt's legacy is not only human, then what else lies hidden in the sands? Perhaps the remnants of a parallel lineage, offspring of gods and mortals, hybrids who ruled as kings and queens. Legends of divine birth echo across dynasties. Pharaohs were not simply rulers, they were sons of Ra, children of Osiris, living Horus. These were not metaphors of legitimacy. They may have been literal claims of bloodline, marking pharaohs as descendants of something greater. Consider the architecture itself. The pyramids are aligned with Orion's belt, as if to mirror a cosmic homeland. Temples are built to channel light at precise moments of the year. Their geometry advanced beyond necessity. These structures were not only monuments, they were messages, codes, perhaps even markers for those who would return. The legacy of Egypt may be less about teaching humanity, and more about leaving a record for others, a cosmic inheritance preserved in stone. And then there are the sealed tombs, deliberately hidden. Why hide bodies? Why bury artifacts so deeply? Because they were not for us. They were meant for those who would one day return. Humanity inherited the visible legacy: math, medicine, astronomy, writing. But the hidden legacy, sealed away, belongs to another. Perhaps Egypt's tombs are not gifts to the future of man, but vaults for the return of the gods. In this sense, humanity may only be the caretaker of Egypt's visible legacy. The true inheritance belongs to those who first gave it. Imagine a sarcophagus, larger than human size, sealed with care. Priests stand around it, chanting not to honor, but to conceal. Inside lies not a king, but a hybrid, half human, half something else. To open it would be to reveal features too shocking for the world above. So, they close it forever, sealing away the evidence of a lineage not meant to be seen. Thousands of years later, archaeologists stumble upon it. They measure, photograph, speculate. But when anomalies appear, elongated bones, strange DNA, the work halts. The coffin is sealed again. The truth remains hidden. Other civilizations echo this practice of dual legacy. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were said to pass down kingship to humans while preserving their own secrets. In Mesoamerica, gods taught men but kept their own powers hidden. In India, avatars descended to mingle with humanity, leaving behind legends of mixed offspring. Egypt may have done the same, but in stone and flesh. Humanity inherited what it could bear. The rest was locked away, waiting. The philosophical implications are staggering. If Egypt's legacy includes another lineage, then humanity is not the sole heir of civilization. We are one branch of a larger tree, a hybrid among purer bloodlines. Our achievements are not ours alone. They are echoes of knowledge given, fragments of wisdom shared. To admit this is to rewrite history. It is to confess that we are not singular, not supreme, not even entirely human. Consider the myths of afterlife. The Book of the Dead describes journeys through the stars, trials in other realms, encounters with beings radiant and terrifying. These texts may not be metaphors for morality. They may be manuals of passage, guides for returning not to heaven, but to a homeland beyond Earth. If so, then Egypt's legacy is interstellar. The mummies, the texts, the temples are fragments of a larger heritage, one that transcends humanity. Now, imagine the discovery that proves it. A tomb opened. Inside, inscriptions describing not prayers, but instructions. A body tested, its DNA revealing sequences not found in any earthly genome. Artifacts analyzed, their materials not matching earthly elements. Suddenly the truth emerges. Egypt's legacy is not only human, it is cosmic. The priests knew this. The myths told it. The stones encoded it. And the mummies. And the mummies preserved it. We are not alone, and never were. We are the children of two legacies, human and something else. Perhaps this is why so many excavations end abruptly. Perhaps this is why DNA tests halt, why coffins remain sealed, why discoveries vanish into silence. The truth would change everything. Religions would tremble, politics would fracture, identity itself would collapse. To say that humanity is not Egypt's only legacy is to admit we are not alone in our origins. It is to confess that civilization itself was guided, perhaps even engineered by others. But secrecy cannot last forever. Sand shifts, tombs crack, technologies advance. One day the legacy hidden in Egypt will be revealed. And when it is, humanity will face the truth, that we are not the only inheritors of Earth's oldest civilization, that our blood carries echoes not of man alone, but of gods who walked the Nile, that Egypt's legacy is larger, stranger, and more terrifying than we have ever imagined. And so, when we look at the pyramids, the mummies, the tombs, let us ask, are these monuments to humanity or to something more? What if humanity is not Egypt's only legacy? What if the true inheritance of the Nile is not stone, not writing, not kingship, but a lineage beyond human, preserved in silence, waiting to be revealed? If so, then Egypt's story is not just the beginning of civilization. It is the beginning of something far greater, something that still waits beneath the sand.